Hey guys, what's up? Today we're listening to Game of Thrones, My Secret Lover is Sansa. So sit back, relax, and just enjoy the ride. And hey, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. I promise, I'm a lot more fun to hang out with. And if you're one of the OGs, welcome back. You already know, Shizi is about to get real.
Chapter 1. The wolfswood was freezing, but beneath the roots of a large tree the ground stayed warm. Alaric Thorne leaned against the tree with one arm around Sansa Stark. She stood close to him, her silk dress brushing his leather armor. To anyone passing by he looked like her sworn shield, a loyal ward of House Stark. In the dark he was the man she clung to. Sansa kissed him with frantic need, the kind that came from knowing her life was about to change. King Robert's caravan stood less than a mile from Winterfell's gates. The little dove should have been in her chambers, dressing for a prince. Instead she hid here, shaking in the arms of the boy raised in her father's shadow. "They're going to marry me off, Alaric," she said. Her voice shook. "My father. The king. They're sending me south." He looked at her and said nothing. He'd loved her for years, but love didn't change what he was. A ward from a broken house. No land. No title. Nothing that could stand in a king's way. The truth pressed down on him. He had turned 18 that morning and already his life felt boxed in. Something rang inside his head. Sharp. Heavy. Like a bell struck too close. Ding. Conditions met. Host has reached age 18. Status confirmed. Uncrowned monarch. Initializing bloodline monarch system. Alaric froze. Sansa pulled back a little. "Alaric?" He didn't answer. Blue light washed over his sight. A clear shape formed in the air before him. Only he could see it. Initialization complete. Host, Alaric Thorne. Bloodline, normal. Current territory, Winterfell, influence, 5%. Detection, high destiny individual, Sansa Stark, in physical contact. Relationship, secret, unbound. Affection level, 94/100. System notice. Target bloodline contains legacy of the first men. By forming a sovereign bond, the host may claim the North without war. "You're scaring me," Sansa said. She reached for his hand. The moment her fingers touched his, something moved inside him. The forest shifted. Not in sight, in feeling. A map opened in his mind. He felt the guards along Winterfell's walls. The wolves moving between the trees. Then something far larger. Slow. Bright. Heavy with gold. Rolling toward the gate. The king's wheelhouse. Alaric tightened his hold. The helplessness vanished. In its place came focus. "No one is taking you anywhere," he said. Alaric didn't wait for her to respond. He reached down, his large hands gripping her thighs, and hoisted her up with a surge of newfound strength that made her gasp. Sansa instinctively wrapped her legs around his waist, her silk skirts bunching up as he pinned her firmly against the rough, ancient bark of the sentinel tree. "Alaric!" she breathed, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her heart hammering against his chest like a trapped bird. He didn't pull away. Instead, he buried his face in the crook of her neck. He ignored the soft feminine scent of lemon cakes and winter roses, focusing on the pulsing heat of her skin. He pressed a slow, bruising kiss right against her collarbone, just above the swell of her chest. Sansa threw her head back, a broken moan escaping her lips as she arched into him. Sansa's back arched further against the sentinel tree, her breath hitching as the moan left her lips. But as Alaric's lips grazed lower, the distant sound of a hunter's horn echoed through the trees, snapping a thread of sanity back into her mind. She shivered, her hands moving from his hair to his chest, pushing back slightly even as her legs stayed locked tightly around his waist. "Control yourself," she whispered into his ear, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and lingering heat. "The scouts, my father, we might get caught. If they find us like this, there will be no south for me and no head on your shoulders." Alaric pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The blue light of the system still flickered in his peripheral vision, but his focus was entirely on the girl in his arms. A dark, playful glint sparked in his eyes, a confidence he had never dared to show before today. Instead of letting her down, he shifted his grip, his large hands giving her soft, silk-covered thighs a firm, possessive squeeze. "Ow! Alaric!" she gasped, her face flushing a deep crimson. She tried to look indignant, but the way her eyes fluttered betrayed her. You are getting naughty day by day. Where did this boldness come from? It came from the thought of losing you to some golden-haired boy, Alaric rasped, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw before landing on her lower lip. Sansa hid her face in the crook of his neck, her heart racing against his leather armor. I have to go. The wheelhouse is almost at the gate. If I'm not there to greet them, my mother will send the guards to look. Chapter 2, Bloodline Monarch. Alaric chuckled, a low, vibrant sound that seemed to hum through Sansa's very bones. He slowly let her slide down the rough bark of the sentinel tree, his hands lingering on her waist until her feet were steady on the frozen earth. Sansa immediately began fussing with her appearance, her cheeks still burning a feverish red. She looked down at her fine silk dress, now hopelessly wrinkled and stained with a bit of tree sap, and then at the stray copper hairs falling wildly across her face. "Look at this," she scolded, though her voice lacked any real bite. She swiped at her skirts, trying to smooth the creases his iron grip had left on her thighs. "You've completely messed up my clothes, Alaric. If Septa Mordain sees me like this, she'll know I haven't been meditating in the godswood. It looked like I've been tossed in a hayloft." She huffed, looking up at him as she tried to fix her hair with trembling fingers. "And my collar, there's a mark right where the silk meets the skin. How am I supposed to hide that from my mother? You've become entirely too reckless today." Sansa turned to leave, her silk skirts rustling against the snow, but she stopped after only 2 steps. She looked back over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a shy, breathless whisper. "I will leave the window of my room open," she murmured, her blue eyes darting around as if the trees themselves had ears. "The ivy is strong enough to hold you. You can climb inside tonight. After the feast." Alaric raised an eyebrow. As she turned to hurry away, he reached out, catching her slender wrist and pulling her back into his chest with a gentle but firm tug. "What do you mean by tonight, little dove?" he teased, his voice dropping an octave as he leaned down to her ear. "Are we going to discuss the history of the first men, or is there a different lesson you had in mind for your night?" Sansa's breath caught, her face glowing like a sunset. She looked up at him, trapped once more against his leather armor, her heart hammering against his ribs. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she stood on her tiptoes and pressed a quick, soft kiss to his cheek, her lips lingering just long enough to send a jolt of electricity through him. "You'll just have to find out," she whispered mischievously. With a final, lingering squeeze of his hand, she broke away and disappeared into the brush, lifting her skirts as she ran toward the looming towers of Winterfell. Alaric watched her go until her blue dot on his territory map was safely within the stone walls. He adjusted his sword belt, his eyes turning toward the horizon where the massive golden roof of the king's wheelhouse was now visible over the ridge. Alaric stood alone in the silence of the wolfswood, the air still smelling of winter roses and the heat of Sansa's skin. He didn't look at the retreating girl, instead his gaze fixed on the translucent blue window hovering in the freezing air. 18 years, Alaric muttered, his voice a low rasp. He spat into the snow, a bitter smirk tugging at his lips. "I've been eating Stark bread and training in the mud while I waited for a sign. You took your sweet time showing up, didn't you?" The screen flickered, the text scrolling upward as if responding to his disdain. System response: the Bloodline Monarch requires the host to reach biological maturity and possess a desire for sovereignty that outweighs survival. "Well, you got your wish," Alaric said, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at the notification regarding Sansa. "Now explain this. What is this sovereign bond? And what do you mean by claiming the North without bloodshed?" The blue interface shimmered, reorganizing its data as Alaric's demand for clarity echoed through his mind. The complex jargon stripped away, leaving only the cold, hard mechanics of his new reality. System protocol: the sovereign bond. The concept: you are the uncrowned monarch. To rule, you must tie your fate to the bloodlines that already hold the land. The method: by physically uniting with a high-destiny female, like Sansa Stark, you initiate a bloodline siphon. The result: you don't just win her heart, you unlock the genetic power of her ancestors. Once the bond is sealed tonight, you will permanently inherit a unique ability from the Stark lineage. Target analysis: Sansa Stark. Source: Legacy of the First Men. Inheritance odds: 1. Warg sight, the ability to see through the eyes of the beasts of the north. 2. Winter skin, drastic increase in physical strength and immunity to the cold. 3. Commanding presence, a natural aura that compels Northmen to follow your lead. System note: sealing this bond makes you a Stark in spirit and power. The North will eventually bow to you not because you conquered them, but because you are them. Alaric stared at the list. A dark, satisfied grin spread across his face. For years he had been the outsider, the boy from a fallen house who had to ask permission to breathe the cold northern air. Now the system was handing him the keys to the kingdom. So, Alaric whispered, watching the last of the king's retinue disappear behind the stone walls of Winterfell. He looked at his hands. They felt heavier, steadier. The biological maturity the system mentioned wasn't just about his age, it was about the hunger for power finally eclipsing his fear of the consequences. The screen flickered one last time before fading into his peripheral vision. Mission update: attend the welcoming feast. Maintain cover. Do not let Eddard Stark or King Robert detect your intent. Countdown to midnight, 6 hours 14 minutes and 22 seconds. Alaric adjusted his boiled leather armor, smoothed his hair, and began the trek back to the castle. Chapter 3: Sansa Window. Alaric moved through the gates of Winterfell. The courtyard was a chaotic mess of Lannister crimson and Baratheon gold. He spotted the king, a bloated, red-faced man roaring for wine, and the Prince Joffrey, looking at the Northmen with a sneer that made Alaric's hand instinctively twitch. He didn't need a voice in his head to tell him that these people were his enemies. He could feel it in the way the air curdled around them. The great hall was a cacophony of banging tankards and grease-slicked laughter. Alaric stood at his post against a cold stone pillar, his eyes fixed on the high table. Sansa. She was a vision in blue silk, her eyes constantly darting toward his dark corner. As the hours ground on, the drink took its toll. The king was eventually dragged off to bed, shouting for more ale, and the queen departed with a face like curdled milk. When Sansa was finally escorted to her chambers by Septa Mordain, she passed Alaric and let her silk handkerchief flutter to the floor. Alaric stepped forward, retrieving the cloth. As he handed it back, their fingers brushed. Her skin was electric, and the look she gave him wasn't one of a lady to her guard, it was the look of a woman crowning her savior. Alaric waited until the torches in the corridors grew dim and the snores of drunken guards echoed off the rafters. He slipped out of a side postern, moving into the deep shadows of the inner ward. The air was frigid, the kind of cold that should have cracked his skin, but he didn't feel the bite. His blood felt like liquid fire after living all these years in this environment. He reached the base of the tower where the Stark children were housed. High above, a single window stood ajar, a faint, warm glow spilling out into the darkness. He grabbed the thick, gnarled ivy clinging to the ancient stone. He climbed with a grace. Halfway up he froze. He looked toward the battlements. A lone guard was walking the wall, his torch flickering against the frost. Alaric pressed himself into the leaves. He didn't just hide, he felt like he became the stone. The guard passed, oblivious to the man clinging to the wall like a gargoyle. Alaric reached the ledge and pulled himself up, his boots finding purchase on the narrow stone sill. He peered inside. The room smelled of lavender and the cedar smoke of the hearth. Sansa was there, pacing restlessly. She wore a heavy bedgown of sky-blue velvet lined with soft rabbit fur, held closed at her waist by a simple silk sash. Beneath the velvet, the hem of a fine white linen shift brushed against her wool-clad ankles. She looked every bit the high-born lady of a frozen castle, but when she saw his silhouette in the window, the regal poise shattered into a raw, hungry relief. Alaric stepped into the room, the cold air of the north trailing behind him like a cape. He kicked the window shut, the latch clicking with a finality that echoed through the quiet room. "You're late," she whispered. Alaric let out a low, rough exhale that was almost a laugh. "The guards were slow to drown themselves in their casks tonight, little dove," he murmured. Alaric moved across the room, the heavy fur rug muffling his boots. He didn't wait for an invitation, sinking onto the edge of her feather mattress. The bed groaned under his weight, and the sudden presence of a man, not a guard but her man, filled the chamber. Sansa didn't hesitate. She crossed the room with a rustle of velvet and sat beside him, so close their thighs pressed together. The heat radiating from her was a shock against the lingering frost on his cloak. "Do you want me to get caught?" she whispered, her voice a mix of genuine fear and a thrill she couldn't hide. "If Septa Mordain hears a man's voice in here, she'll have my father's guards at the door in heartbeats." Alaric looked at her, truly looked at her. In the soft amber glow of the hearth, she looked breathtaking, all soft edges and porcelain skin, a stark contrast to the rough, violent world he had just stepped out of. He reached out, his hand still holding the bite of the midnight air, and gave her cheek a sharp, playful pinch. Sansa let out a tiny, soft gasp, her skin flinching at the cold of his fingers. Ow! Alaric, you're freezing. A reminder of what it's like outside your tower, little dove, he teased, his voice dropping to a low, vibrant rumble. He didn't pull his hand away, instead he let it slide down the column of her throat before settling firmly on her waist. He pulled her a fraction closer, his thumb tracing the blue velvet of her gown. Now, he murmured, leaning in until his lips were inches from her ear, you were the one who invited me up here. You told me earlier I'd have to find out what you had planned. So tell me, what lesson is the Lady of Winterfell going to teach her lowly ward tonight? Is it poetry? History? He felt her heart drumming against her ribs like a trapped bird. He gave her waist a possessive squeeze. Or, he whispered, his breath ghosting over her skin, did you have a different kind of education in mind? Sansa's face flushed a deep, feverish crimson. She didn't look away. Instead, she reached up, her small, warm hands coming to rest on his chest, right over the leather of his jerkin. I think, she breathed, her courage finally catching up to her desire, that you've learned enough from books, Alaric Thorne. Alaric's lips curled into a slow, predatory grin. Without a word, he shifted his weight, his large hands moving from her waist to her shoulders. With a sudden, firm movement, he pushed her back. Sansa let out a soft "oh" of surprise as she fell against the mound of furs and silk pillows. The ancient wood of the bed frame let out a sharp rhythmic creak that seemed to echo like a thunderclap in the silent room. Sansa froze, her eyes widening as she looked toward the heavy oak door, her breath held in her throat. Alaric, however, didn't seem to care. He followed her down, hovering over her, his boots still dangling off the edge as he braced his weight on his forearms. Careful, little dove, he murmured, his voice thick with a mock innocence that didn't match the fire in his eyes. If you keep making the furniture cry out like that, the scepter really will come knocking. He reached out again, but this time he didn't go for her face. His hand slid beneath the heavy sky-blue velvet of her bedgown, finding the soft, rounded curves of her cheeks that were hidden beneath the fine linen of her shift. He gave them a firm, possessive squeeze, his fingers digging into the softness through the fabric. Sansa's back arched off the bed, a muffled gasp dying in her throat as she bit her lip to keep from crying out. The bed creaked again, louder this time. Alaric, she hissed, her face a mask of scandalized heat. Stop. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You're being a brute. A brute? Alaric repeated, tilting his head as if deeply confused. He tightened his grip, pulling her hips flush against his leather-clad thighs. I haven't the slightest idea what you mean. I'm just a simple ward, my lady. I thought you were going to show me some. Southern courtships? Perhaps a dance. Chapter 4, Secret Lesson. Sansa's indignation flared, though the tremble in her hands betrayed her. She planted her palms against his chest and shoved, it was like trying to move the wall itself. Fine, she huffed, her voice a sharp, whispery spike of feigned annoyance. If you're going to be a thick-headed Northman about it, if you'd rather tease me like a common tavern wench than treat me like a lady, then you can just go back out the way you came. She tried to wiggle out from under him, her face turning a shade of red that rivaled the tully auburn of her hair. I was going to be kind. But you're being impossible. Get out, Alaric. Go climb back down your ivy. I'm going to sleep, and I hope the frost bites your nose. Alaric didn't move. Instead, as Sansa tried to roll away from him in a huff of silken indignation, he shifted his weight with a fluid, predatory grace. He let her turn onto her side, but only so he could press himself flush against her back. The contrast was stark, his cold, leather-hewn strength against the yielding softness of her velvet-clad curves. He draped a heavy arm over her waist, pinning her to the furs, and buried his face in the hollow where her auburn hair met the pale column of her neck. He didn't speak. Instead, he pressed a slow, lingering kiss just below her ear. His stubble grazed her skin, a rough friction followed immediately by the searing heat of his lips. He moved lower, tracing the line of her tendon with his mouth, breathing the scent of lavender and warm girl into his lungs. Sansa's lecture died in her throat. Her spine arched instinctively, pressing her hips back into his, and a soft, broken moan escaped her lips before she could catch it. The sound was small, but in the silence of the room it felt like an admission of total defeat. "I thought you told me to leave, little dove," Alaric murmured against her skin, his voice a vibration she felt deep in her chest. The spell of the moment broke just enough for Sansa to remember her pride. She twisted her head back to look at him, though the effect was ruined by her heavy-lidded eyes and the flush creeping up from her collarbone. "I did," she hissed, though she made no move to dislodge his hand from her waist. "You are a truly infuriating dumb man, Alaric Thorne. Why are you still here? I gave you a command. A lady's command." She tried to push at his arm, but her fingers ended up curling into the sleeve of his tunic instead. "Do you ever listen? Honestly, the higher you climb, the more your brains seem to leak out of your ears," she whispered, her voice trembling between a scold and a plea. "I told you to go back to the ivy. So why aren't you moving?" Alaric nipped lightly at her shoulder through the linen of her shift, making her gasp again. "Because," he whispered, his grip tightening possessively, "we both know you'd be miserable if I did. And a good guard never leaves his lady when she's in such a restless state." He turned her slowly in his arms until she was forced to face him, his dark eyes searching hers. "Now," he said, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Are we going to keep arguing about my lack of manners, or are you going to start that lesson?" Alaric didn't wait for her to find her voice. He shifted upward, his large frame casting a shadow over her that blocked out the flickering hearth light. Sansa's breath hitched as he moved his attention from her lips to the swell of her chest, rising and falling rapidly beneath the sky-blue velvet. He leaned down, his face pressing into the soft dip of her cleavage, the heat of his breath soaking through the layers of fabric. When he pressed a firm, open-mouthed kiss against the velvet covering her breast, Sansa's hands flew to his hair, her fingers knotting into the dark strands. "Alaric," she gasped, her voice cracking. He ignored the warning, his tongue tracing the embroidery of the bodice before he took the curved peak of her breast into his mouth through the heavy velvet and the linen beneath. The sensation was dampened by the cloth, but somehow more intense for it. The friction of the fabric against her sensitive skin sent a jolt straight to her core. Sansa's head hit the pillow, her eyes rolling back. She let out a sharp, needy sound that she immediately tried to swallow. Keep your head down," she panted, her voice a frantic, airy thread. "The velvet, it's too thick, you're going to ruin the silk sash." But Alaric was relentless. He moved to the other side, his hands sliding up to cup her, squeezing the soft weight of her through the dress with a possessive strength that made her feel small and entirely claimed. He bit down gently through the blue cloth, a playful, sharp nip that made her entire body jump. "You talk too much for a teacher, little dove," he grumbled against her chest, his voice muffled by the finery. "Less scolding, more learning." He looked up at her then, his eyes dark with a hunger that made the lessons in her books seem like children's fables. His hand moved to the silk sash at her waist, his fingers tugging at the knot. "Is the lady going to help me with these layers?" he whispered. "Or am I going to have to tear them off?" Sansa's breath caught in her throat as his fingers toyed with the silk knot. The arrogance in his voice, the sheer, unyielding confidence of a man who no longer feared the shadow of her father, sent a thrill of terror and devotion through her. "You'd like that, wouldn't you?" she whispered, her eyes meeting his with a sudden, fierce spark. "To tear my finery like a wildling? But a lady chooses." Before she could finish the thought, and before Alaric could pull the sash loose. The blue screen of the system didn't just flicker this time, it turned a violent, alarming crimson. Ding!
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Hold up. Stop for a sec. Look, if you've already made it this far into the video and you're still here, come on, subscribe, bro. Help a brother out, man. It's one tiny click for you, but it's a massive, and I mean massive, heck yeah for me. Plus, it keeps the algorithm from thinking I'm boring, and we both know that's a total lie. All right. I'm done. I'll get out of the way now so you can get back to the good stuff. Stick around and finish listening. It's worth it. Peace.
Chapter 5, Fall of the Young Wolf. Detection, High Destiny Event in Progress. Event, The Fall of the Young Wolf. Location, The Broken Tower. Alaric's hands went still on Sansa's waist. Mission triggered, The First Guardian. Objective, prevent the unwitnessed secret from claiming the life of Bran Stark. Context, the boy has climbed where he shouldn't, and is about to be pushed into the abyss. Reward, 250 monarch points title, protector of the bloodline, plus 10% influence in Winterfell. Penalty for failure, death of Bran Stark. Immediate hostility from Eddard Stark. Alaric? Sansa's voice was small, filled with confusion. She felt the sudden coldness in his posture. What is it? Did you hear someone? Alaric's heart hammered, but not from the heat of the bed. The system was screaming at him. If Bran fell, the North would fracture. If he saved the boy, he didn't just gain points, he gained a debt from the Ned Stark that could never be repaid. He looked at Sansa, her hair spilled across the pillows, her gown half undone. Alaric's hand went still on the silk sash. The crimson text of the system was a cold blade to his gut, shattering the heat of the moment. Alaric? Sansa's voice was soft, her eyes searching his. He looked down at her, his expression twisting into one of pure, unadulterated misery. He could ignore it. He could stay here in the warmth of this bed and let the boy fall. If Bran died, the North would eventually fall into chaos, and maybe in that chaos, a man like Alaric could rise. But the protector title and those points, that was real power. Saving the boy would create a butterfly effect that would shatter the original timeline. It would put Ned Stark in his debt, it would give him a knife to the throat of the Lannisters, and most importantly, it would prove to Sansa that he was more than just a secret shame. It was worth the interruption. Alaric? Sansa's voice was soft, her eyes searching his. She looked so vulnerable, her hair fanned out like fire against the furs. I have to go, Alaric rasped, his voice sounding foreign even to his own ears. He pulled his hands back, the sudden loss of contact making the air feel 10 degrees colder. What? Sansa sat up, clutching the open edges of her bedgown. You're joking. You have to be joking. I forgot something, he said, already sliding toward the edge of the mattress. Something very important. I have to go, Sansa. Now. Important? She hissed, her voice a sharp, low-volume spike that vibrated with indignation. What is more important than this? Than me? She looked at her half-undone dress, her face flushing with the sting of rejection. If you walk out of that window, Alaric, if you leave me like this, don't you dare think. Alaric didn't even give her the chance to finish. He was already on the sill, his boots catching the stone. He glanced back once, at the fury and the hurt in her eyes, and then he dropped into the darkness of the ivy. He hit the frozen ground with a soft thud, his knees absorbing the impact. Just as he straightened his tunic to sprint toward the broken tower, a heavy, feathered object came whistling down from above. Thump! A silk pillow hit him square in the chest. He caught it instinctively, the scent of lavender and Sansa's hair filling his nose. Slam! The window above him shut with a violent bang, the wooden latch clicking loudly enough to echo in the yard. A second later, the heavy curtains were yanked shut, cutting off the amber glow of the hearth. Alaric stood there for a heartbeat, clutching the pillow to his chest in the freezing northern night. He shook his head, a dark, dry chuckle escaping his throat as he tucked the pillow into a niche in the stone wall to retrieve later. Little dove, he muttered, turning his eyes toward the jagged silhouette of the broken tower. Saving your brother is a bit more important than my pride right now. Besides, how else am I going to get your father to owe me his soul? He turned and sprinted, the system's countdown ticking away in his peripheral vision. The countdown in his vision hit 0 just as a small, flailing shape broke from the high window of the broken tower. Bran didn't scream, the air had been knocked out of him by the push. Alaric threw himself forward, his boots skidding on the frost. He didn't have time for a clean catch. He lunged, arms outstretched, catching the boy just 3 feet above the jagged stones. The momentum slammed Alaric into the dirt, his knees taking a brutal impact, but he held tight. Bran was a statue of terror in his arms, his small face ghostly white and his eyes rolling back in his head. Breathe, Bran. Breathe. Alaric hissed, carrying the boy quickly into the shadow of a nearby weirwood tree, away from any prying eyes in the tower windows. He set the boy down against the thick roots and pulled a small water skin from his belt. Bran was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering, not from the cold, but from the shock of the fall and what he had seen before it. Alaric pressed the skin to the boy's lips. Drink. Slowly, Alaric commanded, his voice steadying. Bran took a frantic gulp, coughing as the water hit his throat. He pushed me, the boy whispered, his voice cracking. The man with the golden hair. The queen they were. Chapter 6, Protector of the Bloodline. Bran took a frantic gulp, coughing as the water hit his throat. He pushed me, the boy whispered, his voice cracking. The man with the golden hair. The queen they were. Alaric gripped Bran's shoulders, not to shake him but to ground him. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper that cut through Bran's panic. Bran. Hey. Look at me. Alaric waited until the boy's eyes found his. They were wide and glassy, darting everywhere else. I know, he said quietly. I saw him too. Bran sucked in a breath like he might start crying. But listen, Alaric went on, keeping his voice low. They're not here anymore. They're back in their rooms. If we run in there right now yelling about what you saw, what do you think they'll say? Bran hesitated. His mouth opened then closed. Alaric raised a finger. Not to silence him, to slow him. They'll say you slipped, he said. That you climbed somewhere you shouldn't have. His mouth hardened. They'll say I'm lying. And people will believe them. Bran's hands shook around the waterskin. But my father. I know, Alaric said at once. Your father would believe you. His voice softened. And he'd draw his sword. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. And once that happens, it doesn't stop. Bran swallowed. People would die, Alaric said. Good people. Men who never hurt you. And Winterfell would pay for it. That landed. The fear in Bran's face shifted. It wasn't panic anymore. It was weight. Alaric brushed the dirt from the boy's cheek with his thumb. So we do this the smart way. You slipped. The frost took your feet. I was close enough to catch you. That's it. That's the whole story. Bran nodded, unsure. We don't forget, Alaric said, leaning closer. We just don't say it out loud. Not yet. A thin smile crossed his mouth. You grow up. You get stronger. You learn how this world works. He squeezed Bran's shoulder. Firm. Steady. Today all you have to do is live, he said. Can you do that? Bran drew in a slow breath. Then another. Yes, he whispered and nodded. Alaric scooped Bran up. The boy was a featherweight, but the secret he carried weighed a ton. Alaric didn't run for the great hall, it would be empty and dark. He ran for the guest house and the lord's chambers, where the life of the castle was tucked away behind heavy oak and thick firs. As he sprinted across the moonlit courtyard, his boots crunched like breaking glass on the frost. He didn't just shout, he roared. Guards! To the broken tower. Lord Bran has fallen. The cry shattered the silence of Winterfell. A window slammed open in the guest house. A torch flared in a guard tower. Alaric reached the base of the stairs just as the first few Stark guards stumbled out, half-dressed, clutching spears. Then the heavy doors of the Lord's solar groaned open. Ned Stark appeared, wrapped in a heavy fur cloak, his face pale and eyes sleep-heavy, until he saw the limp shape in Alaric's arms. Bran? Ned's voice was a ragged whisper. Alaric skidded to a halt, falling to one knee as if his legs had finally given out from the adrenaline. He breathed heavily, making sure he looked like a man who had just sprinted for a life. He fell, my lord, Alaric gasped, his head bowed. From the broken tower. I saw him slip. I caught him just as he reached the stones. I think the frost took his footing. By now more figures were appearing in the shadows of the gallery above. Alaric spotted a flash of golden hair, Jaime Lannister, standing in the darkness of a doorway, his face unreadable. Beside him, Cersei's silhouette was rigid. They had heard the shout. They had come to see if their problem was dead. Catelyn Stark rushed down the stairs, her nightgown trailing in the dirt. She snatched Bran from Alaric's arms with a sob. He's cold. Ned, he's so cold. I fell, mother, Bran whispered into her neck. His voice was small and shaky. Alaric felt the gaze of the Kingslayer move from the boy to him. Jaime wasn't a fool. He knew the odds of someone just happening to be under that specific window at that specific time. But what could he say? Why were you there to catch the boy I pushed? Catelyn held Bran so tightly it looked like she might fuse with him, her tears wetting his hair. Ned stepped closer, his shadow falling over them both. He looked at the broken tower, a jagged silhouette against the stars, and then back at his son. Bran, Ned said, his voice low but carrying the steel of a lord. You know the rules. You were climbing again. Bran looked up, his eyes darting briefly to Alaric. He saw the slight, encouraging nod from the man who had just saved him. Bran swallowed hard, his voice small but steady. I saw a flower, father, Bran lied, the words coming out in a rush. A pale blue one growing high in the masonry of the old tower. I thought mother would like it. But the stone was wet. The frost. He choked back a sob that was only half fake. I slipped. I reached for a ledge, but it broke away. Ned looked up at the heights. From where Alaric had supposedly caught him, the drop was nearly 80 feet. At that height, hitting the ground wasn't a broken leg, it was a closed casket. You fell from the high ledge? Ned asked, his face turning a shade paler. I tried to hold on, Bran whispered. I fell for so long. I thought I was going to die. He swallowed. And then, I hit him. Bran looked up at Alaric. He caught me. It hurt. But he didn't let go. A heavy silence settled over the courtyard. The guards stared at Alaric with new respect. Catching a boy from that height took more than luck. It took timing. Strength. Nerve. From the gallery above, Alaric saw Jaime Lannister's hand tighten on the railing. The golden secret was safe for now, but the look in the Kingslayer's eyes said he understood how close this had come. And how dangerous Alaric might be. Ned turned back to him, his face grave. Thorne, you saved the future of this house. If you hadn't been there, my son would be lying dead on the stones. He paused. You saved his life. The North does not forget that. You have the thanks of House Stark. Go to the kitchens and warm yourself. We'll speak of reward after the maester has seen to my son. Alaric bowed his head. As the Starks rushed Bran inside, the courtyard slowly filled with curious, half-awake onlookers. Alaric straightened and brushed dirt from his knees. He glanced up once more at the gallery. Jaime Lannister was still watching. Alaric met his eyes. Gave a short, proper nod, the kind a loyal guard gives a royal guest, then turned away. System notification. Mission status, success. Reward, 250 monarch points. New title unlocked, Protector of the Bloodline plus 10% influence with House Stark. Alaric headed for the kitchens, already moving past the rescue. He had a silk pillow hidden in a stone niche. And tomorrow, a very angry, very confused Lady Sansa waiting for answers. Chapter 7. The stone halls were colder than the yard, but Alaric didn't feel it. He was still buzzed from the system's success. He headed for the kitchens. A shadow moved near a pillar by the guest house. Nice catch, a voice said. It sounded rich and smug. Alaric stopped. Jaime Lannister stepped into the torchlight. He didn't look worried about the boy who had almost died, he looked like he'd been caught doing something. Sir Jaime, Alaric nodded. A small icon flickered in the corner of his eye, the system was scanning Jaime. Tell me, Jaime said, leaning against a railing. What's a guy like you doing at a ruined tower at midnight? Are the girls here that boring? I like the night air, Alaric said. He kept his voice flat and looked Jaime in the eye. Good thing too. Otherwise, Lord Eddard would be waking up to a dead son. Jaime's eyes narrowed. He knew the timing was too perfect. Lucky for the kid. And lucky for you. Just don't let the hero title go to your head. Jaime walked away. Alaric watched him go. He knew the truth now, and the Lannisters knew he was the only one who could get them couched. By morning, everyone was talking about it. The ward from the dead house had caught the falling prince. Alaric was called to Ned Stark's office. Ned looked tired. Alaric, Ned said. His voice was heavy, like he was still processing how close he'd come to losing Bran. The North doesn't forget a debt like that. Neither will I. I just did what I could, my lord, Alaric replied. Ned sighed. I was going to leave you here with Robb. But Bran keeps asking for you. And Sansa says she feels safer with you around. A screen popped up in Alaric's head. Stark influence, plus 15%. New job, personal guard to Sansa Stark. Alaric walked out of Ned's office. The hallway was packed and loud. With the king's people everywhere, Winterfell felt more like a beehive than a castle. Near the great hall, he saw a flash of blue. Sansa was walking his way with her maids. She looked calm like a proper lady, but as she brushed past him in the crowd, her hand hit his. It was fast. He felt a scrap of paper slide into his palm before she walked on without looking back. Alaric didn't stop. He moved to a quiet corner of the courtyard and hid behind a stone wall to open the note. The writing was fancy but messy. Our spot. When my parents are with the king. He tucked the paper into his shirt. He knew where she meant, the big tree in the woods. Hours later, while the great hall was noisy with everyone eating breakfast, Alaric slipped into the forest. Sansa was already there under the branches. She had her hood up to hide her red hair. She turned around when she heard him. She didn't look like a princess anymore. She just looked like the girl who used to throw pillows at him. Alaric walked quietly over the frozen ground. He stepped up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Sansa gasped, but she didn't pull away. She leaned into him and turned around, burying her face in his neck. Her fingers gripped his shoulders hard. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words coming out in a rush. "I was so selfish. I was mad that you left. But if I had made you stay, Bran would be." She choked on a sob and held him tighter. She couldn't stop saying sorry. Her heart was thumping against his ribs. She looked like she was still seeing her brother's limp body in her head. "You saved him," she said. "While I was acting like a brat, you were saving his life. Thank you, Alaric. Thank you." Alaric didn't say anything. He tilted her chin up and kissed her. They sat down together between the thick roots of the tree. Even with the cold air, it felt warm where they touched. Sansa gripped his hand with both of hers and leaned her head on his shoulder. They watched the towers of Winterfell in the distance for a long time. Finally, Sansa looked down and spoke in a low, shy voice. "I wanted to give myself to you last night." Chapter 8, Wake Up My Prince. "I wanted to give myself to you last night," she said. Her face turned red as she looked at their hands. "I knew the king was here. I knew they'd take me south for alliance, away from home, away from you. I wanted it to be my choice before they married me off to a prince." She squeezed his hand and gave him a tired smile. "But my father made you my guard. We'll be on the road for weeks and the city is huge." She leaned in, whispering in his ear. "We're going to have a lot more chances than I thought, Alaric." Alaric pulled her close. He felt drained. The rush from the system and the run-in with Jaime was gone, leaving him exhausted. "You haven't slept, have you?" Sansa asked. She saw the dark circles under his eyes. She kissed his cheek. Her skin was cool, but it made him feel warm. "Lie down," she said, patting her lap. She unbuckled her heavy fur cloak and spread it out. "Use this. The ground is cold, but I'll keep you warm." Alaric looked at the trees. "Sansa, the patrols. If a scout or Jory finds us like this, it's over. If I fall asleep, I won't hear them." Sansa didn't blink. She grabbed his hand and pulled him down. She looked more confident than usual. "I'm not helpless, Alaric," she whispered. "I've lived here my whole life. I know how the guards move and how the wind sounds when horses are coming." She settled his head on her lap and covered him with the heavy cloak. She started running her fingers through his hair. "Just sleep," she said. "I'll watch the woods. I'll wake you up way before anyone gets close. Let me guard you for once." The system flickered one last time in the corner of his eye. Alaric smelled lemon cakes and roses. His eyes finally closed and he drifted off. The king's golden carriage sat in the middle of the courtyard like a giant fancy box. Inside, it smelled like spiced wine and heavy perfume, nothing like the cold, pine-scented air outside. Jaime Lannister leaned against the velvet wall. He stared out the window, thinking about the moment Alaric Thorne had walked out of the shadows with the Stark boy in his arms. "He knows," Jaime said, his voice low. Cersei stopped pouring her wine. She knew exactly who he meant. "The ward? He's a nobody, Jaime. Just a stray dog the Starks kept to feel good about themselves." "A nobody who was in the perfect spot to catch a falling kid," Jaime said, turning to her. "I saw his face. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. If he saw us in that tower." Cersei slammed her wine carafe onto the table. Her green eyes were cold. "So what if he does? He has no land and no title. It's the word of a servant against the queen. He has no proof. His story would die the second I told him to shut up." She stepped closer to Jaime, her silk dress rustling. "The Starks are fools. They made him the girl's guard because they think he's a hero." "A hero is just a man who hasn't been killed yet," Jaime muttered. "Then find a way," Cersei whispered, touching the golden line on his chest. "The road south is long. There are bogs and bandits. Accidents happen. If he's a threat, take care of him. An arrow, a fall, whatever it takes." She looked toward the door. The Stark boy might die on his own. But that ward, he's a problem. Watch him, Jaime. And when the time is right, get rid of him. The heavy weight of sleep finally lifted as Alaric felt a soft warmth against his forehead. The system's blue screen, usually bright and sharp, was just a dim pulse in the corner of his eye, signaling that his energy was back. "Wake up, my prince," a voice whispered. It was sweet and soft right next to his ear. Chapter 9, Blood Summoning. "Alaric, wake up, my prince," a voice whispered, sweet as honey and soft as the morning mist. Alaric's eyes snapped open. He was still cocooned in the gray-blue wool of Sansa's travel cloak, his head resting in her lap. The scent of winter roses was thick in the air, a reminder of the girl looking down at him with an expression that held no traces of the little dove the world saw. "You slept well," she murmured, her fingers giving his dark hair one final, lingering stroke. "It has been nearly 2 hours. I watched the tree lean the whole time. Not even a squirrel passed without me noticing." Alaric shifted, the stiffness of the frozen ground finally reaching his joints as he sat up. He let out a long, heavy breath, feeling more centered than he had since the system first flickered to life. He looked at Sansa, who was still draped in the shadows of the sentinel tree, her eyes bright with a newfound vigilance. He reached out, his large hand landing on the crown of her head in a slow, affectionate pat, his fingers smoothing the stray copper hairs that had escaped her braids. "You did well, Sansa," he said, his voice a low, appreciative rasp. "I didn't think you had the patience to sit still in the cold for that long. Maybe you're more of a Northman than the Septas give you credit for." Sansa leaned into his touch for a moment, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips before she swiped his hand away with a playful huff. She began to gather her heavy cloak, smoothing the wrinkles out of her silk skirts. "Well," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "it wasn't just me. A lady helped me keep watch." Alaric raised an eyebrow, his hand dropping to the hilt of his sword. "A lady? Who? If one of your handmaidens followed us out here." "Not a handmaiden," Sansa interrupted, her smile widening as she whistled a low, sharp note that Alaric had never heard her use before. From the dense brush of the wolfswood, a shape emerged, silent, gray, and larger than any hunting hound. Lady, the direwolf pup, trotted into the clearing. The animal didn't go to Sansa. Instead, it walked straight to Alaric, sniffing his leather boots before sitting back on its haunches, its eyes fixed on the tree lean they had just been watching. "She stayed by my side the whole time you slept," Sansa explained, looking at the wolf with a mix of pride and awe. "Whenever the wind shifted or a branch snapped in the distance, she grew still. I just watched her ears. If they stayed forward, I knew we were safe." Sansa looked back at Alaric, her expression softening. "You see? You aren't the only one who can protect what belongs to them." Alaric looked from the girl to the wolf. Alaric reached out, his calloused palm meeting the thick, gray fur of the direwolf's head. Lady leaned into the touch, her yellow eyes steady and preternaturally calm as she accepted the silent acknowledgement from the man who now stood as the shield of her pack. "She's more vigilant than half the guards on the walls," Alaric muttered, giving the wolf a final, firm pat on the shoulder. Sansa stood, brushing the last of the frozen pine needles from her skirts. She looked toward the distant towers of Winterfell, the golden light of the afternoon beginning to wane. "I have to go," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "I've stretched my time here long enough. If I stay a moment longer, my mother will realize I'm not in the Sept and send Jory or the guards to find me." Alaric remained seated for a heartbeat, his dark eyes fixed on her face. He read the lingering hesitation in her posture, the way her fingers toyed with the clasp of her cloak, and the expectant softness in her gaze. He let out a low, dry chuckle. "You're waiting for a goodbye kiss, aren't you?" he asked, a dark, playful glint sparking in his eyes. Sansa's cheeks immediately flushed a deep crimson, a stark contrast to the pale porcelain of her skin. She didn't look away this time. Instead, she gave him a small, shy nod, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Alaric rose with a fluid movement, closing the distance between them. He didn't just offer a quick peck, he wrapped a heavy arm around her waist, pinning her to his leather-clad chest as he tilted her chin up. He pressed a slow, bruising kiss against her lips. When he finally pulled back, Sansa was breathless, her eyes darting around the trees as if the forest itself might have seen. With a final, lingering squeeze of his hand, she turned and disappeared into the brush, Lady trailing silently behind her. Alaric stood alone in the silence of the wolfswood, the air still carrying her scent. He turned his focus inward, fixing his attention on the translucent blue window hovering in the frozen air. "All right," Alaric whispered, his voice rough against the cold. "System, you still haven't told me what these monarch points are for." The blue light pulsed in response, the text shifting as if reacting to his focus. System query acknowledged, nature of monarch points. Current balance, 250 MP. Monarch points are the currency of sovereignty, the system replied, its voice emotionless and heavy. They can be used to increase attributes, upgrade skills, create constructs in the real world, and eventually purchase blood soldiers for summoning. As Alaric remained still beneath the trees, the interface continued. Lines of text scrolled quickly, outlining the true scope of the power now bound to him. The display shifted again, organizing itself into a clear list. System, Monarch Path options available. Monarch points available, 250. System, Attribute upgrade. Current Monarch points, 250. Cost, 100 MP plus 1 attribute point. Cost increases with each upgrade. Example, if 1 attribute point is assigned to Strength, the increase is equal to approximately 3 months of harsh physical training. Endurance will also increase as a secondary effect. Current available passives. Monarch's Command. Cost high. Effect, Project's Authority. Followers show increased loyalty and greater resistance to betrayal. Note, units affected are less likely to rout. Status, locked, insufficient monarch points. Blood summoning. Status, no bloodlines possessed. Blood summoning options will unlock once a bloodline is acquired. Note, additional bloodlines will unlock more summoning options. Chapter 10, Jon Snow and Tyrion. The blue light of the system receded into Alaric's peripheral vision as he nodded slowly, the digital interface fading back into the darkness of the Godswood. He studied the cost of his potential growth with a calculating eye, 100 MP for the equivalent of 3 months of grueling physical training. With a current balance of 250 MP, he had enough to sharpen himself into a lethal instrument, but the thought of the Lannisters stayed his hand. He pictured Cersei and Jaime plotting to erase him like a stubborn stain on a rug. If he didn't secure the sovereign bond with Sansa soon, he would be walking blindly into a lion's den on the long road south. "Not yet," he muttered. The cold northern air stung his lungs as he decided to hoard his points for a moment of true desperation. He turned away from the tree, his boots crunching through the frozen brush toward the looming, jagged silhouette of the castle. Alaric cut across the inner yard, his breath hitching in frigid air. The rhythmic clack-shush of steel against wood echoed through the courtyard, drawing him toward the training grounds where flickering torchlight danced over frost-bitten stone. He slowed as he reached the shadows of the gallery. Jon Snow stood there, stripped of his heavy cloak and clad in a simple tunic, moving through sword drills with a grim, focused silence. Nearby, perched on a wine barrel, Tyrion Lannister watched with the keen interest of a gambler studying the horses at the track. "Skill is wasted without purpose," Tyrion drawled. His voice carried easily over the sound of Jon's strikes, "and purpose is wasted without ambition." Alaric stayed at the edge of the yard, half hidden in the gloom. Suddenly, a sharp crystalline chime rang inside his skull. Ding! Quest triggered, the unbroken circle. Objective, ensure the loyalty of one high destiny male. Tyrion pressed on, undaunted by the eye watching them from the darkness. Never forget what you are, bastard. The world won't. Make it your strength. Wear it like armor and no one can use it to wound you. Alaric stepped into the light. Armor is for men who expect to get hit, he said. His voice was low and rough. I prefer to end the fight before the blade gets close. Jon spun around and lowered his wooden sword. Tyrion leaned back, squinting his mismatched eyes before a grin spread across his face. The hero of the hour, Tyrion said. He lifted his wine cup. The ward who caught a falling Stark. A miracle, they say. The boy slipped. I caught him, Alaric said. He didn't blink. That's all. Tyrion grunted as he climbed down from his barrel. Bold words for a ward. Our friend Jon here wants to hide on a wall of ice to find himself. You? You sound like a man who wants to rule it. Alaric stepped closer. I don't want the wall. I want a world where we don't have to hide behind stone to feel safe. Kings build walls. A monarch makes them useless. The yard went quiet. Only a nearby torch crackled. Jon stared at Alaric like he was seeing a stranger. Tyrion took a slow sip of wine, his eyes moving between the two men. Alaric watched them back. He wasn't just talking, he was checking them. He wanted to see if Tyrion was a threat or a tool he could use. More importantly, he needed Jon. He had to show Jon that the Night's Watch was a dead end. "The wall is a place of honor, Alaric," Jon said, his voice tight. Alaric turned to Jon. "A shield is only good if someone is strong enough to hold it. If lions or fools take over the north, the men on that wall will be forgotten. You'll be left to starve in the snow." Tyrion laughed so hard he spilled his wine. He wiped his lip with a sleeve. "He's got you there, Snow. You can't eat honor and it won't keep your toes from freezing off." Tyrion's smile vanished. He leaned in, his eyes sharp. "You talk about kings and the world breaking. What do you see when you look at my sister and her people?" "He's fishing," Alaric thought. "He wants to know if I saw what happened in that tower." "I see a storm dressed in silk," Alaric said. "They think the north is just a cold room they're visiting. They don't realize the floor is made of ice and it's starting to crack." Alaric stepped closer to Jon, ignoring the Lannister. He lowered his voice, the words sounding like treason. "The king is taking your father south. He's taking Sansa. Winterfell is going to be empty. You'll be hundreds of miles away, stuck in a life where you can never help them again. Is that the honor you want? Or do you want the power to actually protect your family?" Jon flinched. The words hit him right where it hurt, his fear for his family and his need to belong. System analysis. Target Jon Snow is reconsidering his path. Affection/loyalty, 45/100 interested. Tyrion watched them both, his eyes darting back and forth. "You are a dangerous man, Alaric Thorne," he muttered. The wind was picking up, almost swallowing his voice. "I can't decide if I should buy you a drink or run for my life." "Do both," Alaric said with a sharp, mean grin. "It'll make for a better story." The sound of heavy metal boots hitting the stone cut Tyrion's laughter short. The air felt colder as someone approached. Prince Joffrey stood in the torchlight. He had bright blonde hair and a permanent sneer. Behind him loomed Sandor Clegane, the Hound, looking like a giant shadow. Joffrey looked at the group, his eyes stopping on Alaric with pure disgust. Chapter 11, Beating Prink. "So this is the great hero?" Joffrey drawled, his voice high and thin, dripping with arrogance. "The lowly ward who thinks himself a knight because he caught a falling boy. My mother says the north is full of beggars and dirt, but I didn't realize they let the beggars talk like kings." Jon Snow's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively moving toward the hilt of his practice sword. Tyrion sighed, taking a long pull of his wine as if bracing himself for a headache. "Prince Joffrey," Tyrion said dryly, "I thought you were busy being tucked into your silk sheets." Joffrey ignored his uncle, his gaze locked on Alaric. He stepped closer, stopping only when the Hound stood directly behind him like a mountain of steel. "I heard your little speech, Thorne. Removing the need for walls. You have a very long tongue for someone who owns nothing but the boots he stands in." Alaric didn't bow. He simply stood his ground, his dark eyes absorbing the prince's features. System analysis. Target Joffrey Baratheon. Status: hostile/arrogant/volatile. Threat level: low, personal/extreme, political. "A tongue is a tool, Your Grace," Alaric said. He was calm, unlike Joffrey. "Just like a sword. Some people are just better at using it." Joffrey's face turned a blotchy red. "You think you're my equal? You're a stray dog the Starks kept out of pity." He kicked a wooden practice sword at Alaric's feet. "Pick it up. Everyone is talking about how fast you are. Let's see how a hero fights when it's not a falling kid." "The prince wants a fight, boy," the Hound grunted. His voice sounded like stones grinding together. "Unless you're soft." Jon stepped up and whispered, "Alaric, don't. He's the prince." Alaric ignored him. He saw an opening. If he could embarrass Joffrey without breaking the law, he'd look even better to the crowd, and show Jon that the prince was just a loud-mouthed coward. "A spar, Your Grace?" Alaric picked up the wooden sword. He felt the weight and measured the distance in his head. "I wouldn't want to hurt the future king. It might look bad for me." Joffrey let out an ugly laugh. "Hurt me? Dog, give me your steel." "The queen wouldn't like that," the Hound said, though he looked like he wanted to see the mess. "I said give it to me." Joffrey snapped. He grabbed a blunt training sword from a rack and swung it wildly. "I'll show you what real blood looks like. Get on your knees or fight." Alaric adjusted his grip on the wooden lath. He could feel the system humming in the back of his mind, his 250 MP a safety net he hoped he wouldn't have to touch. "As you wish, my prince," Alaric said, a cold, predatory light entering his eyes. "Let's see if you're as sharp as your crown." Alaric stepped into the open circle of packed dirt. The torches framed him in flickering orange light. Frost crunched under his boots as he set his stance. Loose. Balanced. Ready. Joffrey rushed first. It was ugly. The prince swung high and wide, all shoulder and rage. The steel blade hissed through empty air. Alaric shifted half a step to the side and tapped Joffrey's wrist with the wooden sword. Not hard. Just enough. The steel clattered to the ground. A ripple moved through the yard. Joffrey froze, stunned, then snarled. "Pick it up," he barked, more command than request. Alaric didn't move. "Again," Joffrey shouted, bending to grab the sword. This time he came in faster. Still sloppy. Alaric let the blade pass close enough for the wind to brush his cheek. He pivoted and struck Joffrey's forearm. The blow landed flat, controlled and precise. Joffrey cried out. The sword dropped again. Laughter broke from somewhere near the gallery. It died fast when Sandor shifted his weight. Joffrey's face twisted. "Stop playing with me." "I'm not," Alaric said. "You are." That did it. Joffrey screamed and charged, swinging with both hands like he wanted to split Alaric in two. Alaric stepped inside the arc. He slammed the wooden blade into Joffrey's ribs, then hooked the prince's ankle and shoved. Joffrey hit the ground hard. The sound echoed off stone. Silence followed. Alaric held the wooden sword against Joffrey's throat. He leaned in close so only the prince could hear him. "You want men to kneel? Try harder next time, kid." Alaric stepped back and lowered the blade. Sandor moved in fast, pulling Joffrey to his feet. "Enough," the hound grunted. Joffrey shoved him off. "He attacked me," he shrieked, his hand shaking as he pointed at Alaric. "He embarrassed me." Tyrion cleared his throat. "You challenged him? In the yard? In front of everyone?" Jon stood still, staring at Alaric. He didn't look scared, he looked impressed. Joffrey looked around and saw the guards and stable boys watching. He saw the judgment on their faces. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. "This isn't over," Joffrey spat. "My mother will hear about this." "I'm sure she will," Alaric said. Joffrey stormed off. Sandor followed him without saying a word. The yard finally felt quiet again. System update, public perception increased. Jon Snow, loyalty plus 15. Status, trust forming. Jon exhaled slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Alaric said. "I did." Tyrion watched him with a sudden, unblinking focus. The smirk was gone and the mask had dropped. "He's needed a dose of reality for a long time," Tyrion said. "I think you finally gave him the education he deserved." Alaric wiped frost from his knuckles. "Someone needed to." Tyrion smiled thinly. "I think," he said, "you've just made yourself impossible to ignore." I guess so." As Alaric watched the retreating backs of the prince and his shadow. A sharp crystalline chime resonated through his mind, louder and more triumphant than the previous triggers. System notification. Objective accomplished, publicly demonstrate the fragility of the Crown Prince. Feat, humiliated the Crown Prince without drawing blood or breaking the law of the yard. Impact, the seeds of doubt have been planted in the minds of the Northern Witnesses and Jon Snow. Rewards granted. Plus 250 Monarch points MP. Alaric felt a low, dark vibration in his chest, a dry giggle that he caught before it reached his lips. He had suspected the system rewarded sovereignty over mere survival, but his gamble had paid off better than he'd imagined. The 250 MP surge settled into his mind, doubling his previous hoard and giving him a total of 500 Monarch points to sharpen his path south. The silence of the yard didn't last. The heavy thud of the great hall's doors swinging open cut through the frost, and soon the courtyard was flooded with the heavy hitters of the realm. King Robert led the way, his face a mottled red from wine and the biting cold. Behind him followed Ned Stark, looking grim enough to match the weather, while Catelyn walked at his side, her face pale with worry. Cersei Lannister moved with the grace of a stalking cat, her eyes finding her son instantly. Her twin, Jaime, walked a half-step behind her, his hand already resting easy on the gilded hilt of his sword. "What is this?" the king roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "My son bleeding in the dirt?" Joffrey ran to his mother, his face twisting like he was in pain. "He attacked me, father. The ward, he hit me when I wasn't looking. He called you a fool, he said he'd get rid of all kings." Chapter 12, King's Judgment. Alaric felt the shift in the air, the sudden, sharp weight of royal execution hanging over the yard. He didn't flinch. Instead, he dropped to one knee, the picture of a humble, dutiful protector, though his eyes remained fixed on the king. "Your Grace," Alaric said. His voice was a low, steady rasp that carried across the yard. "I am only a ward. I wouldn't dare strike royalty. I was training with Jon when the prince insisted on showing us how a king fights. He told me to defend myself or bleed. I only held my ground so he wouldn't trip and hurt himself." "Liar!" Joffrey shrieked, grabbing Cersei's silk dress. Alaric looked at Jon, then at the crowd of guards and stable boys. "I'm sure everyone saw how brave the prince was. If he fell, it was just the ice. The north is hard on people who aren't used to it. I only caught him so he wouldn't hit the stone." It was a perfect lie. By calling Joffrey brave and blaming the ice, he forced Joffrey to either agree or admit he was weak. Sansa stood near her mother, her fingers twisting her skirt, unable to help. Cersei's face turned white with rage. "He's mocking us, Robert. He's mocking the crown." Jaime didn't wait for the king to speak. With a sharp shing, his sword was out. The steel glowed in the torchlight. He stepped toward Alaric, looking ready to kill. "A ward who talks like a lord," Jaime muttered. "Let's see if that wooden toy can stop real steel." Warning, Jaime Lannister has initiated combat. Threat level, lethal. Alaric's hand tightened on the wooden training sword. Before Jaime's blade could taste the air between them, another sound cut through the courtyard, the heavy, unmistakable ring of Stark steel. Lord Eddard Stark stepped forward, his face a mask of frozen granite as his own sword, though not the great sword ice, blocked Jaime's path. "Lower your steel, Ser Jaime," Ned commanded, his voice carrying the authority of the North. Jaime's eyes turned cold. "The boy hit the Prince Stark. In the South, we call that treason. He'd already be a head shorter." "This isn't the South," Ned snapped. He looked over at King Robert. "Robert, this is a training yard. People get bruised. My ward says it was a spar. Your son says it was an attack." Ned looked at Tyrion, who was still by the wine barrel, then at the guards. "We have witnesses. My son Jon was here. Your brother Tyrion was here too. Before we start killing people in my own home, let's find out what actually happened." Tyrion let out a dry, short laugh, raising his cup toward the king. "It was a lively display, King. Joffrey wanted to show the ward how a prince handles a sword. Unfortunately, the prince found that northern gravity is far more loyal to the ground than it is to the crown." Beside her husband, Catelyn Stark gripped Sansa's hand, her eyes darting between Alaric and the Kingslayer. Sansa remained silent, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her eyes never left Alaric. She had watched him save her brother, and now she watched him defy a prince. The tension in the courtyard shifted like a breaking ice flow. King Robert's gaze moved from the red-faced, sniveling Joffrey to the cool, indifferent Tyrion, and finally to the calm ward kneeling in the dirt. Robert was a man who lived for the roar of the melee, and he knew a lie when it smelled of milk and cowardice. "Is that true, Tyrion?" Robert bellowed, his voice vibrating with a sudden, dangerous mirth. "The boy beat him with a wooden stick?" "Beat is a harsh word," Tyrion replied, his voice dripping with mock diplomacy. "I'd say he offered the prince a very thorough education in balance." Joffrey was quite persistent. He kept running into the ward's practice blade as if he were trying to headbutt it. The courtyard erupted into a muffled wave of snickers. Cersei's face twisted as if she had swallowed ash. "Enough." Robert's voice thundered. He turned on Joffrey, his eyes burning with a mix of shame and fury. "You let a ward humiliate you with a toy? You charge in like a blind bull and then come crying to your mother about treason when the dirt meets your face." "But father, I said enough." Robert snapped. "You've embarrassed the crown, you've embarrassed your name, and by the gods, you've embarrassed me. You will go to your chambers, Joffrey. No feast tonight." Cersei stepped forward. "Robert, you cannot truly mean to punish your son for the insolence of a servant." "The servant was training, Cersei." Robert shouted. "Your son was playing at war and lost to a better man. Be glad it was a wooden stick and not a Northman's axe." The king turned his gaze back to Alaric. "Stand up, lad. You've got a steady hand. Don't let these fools bother you." System notification. Mission update, the Lion's Pride broken. Objective, successfully navigate royal judgment. Success. Reward, plus 100 monarch points MP. New status, target Cersei Lannister has marked you for removal. System, balance update. Previous balance, 500 MP. Current total, 600 monarch points. Alaric stood slowly, feeling the weight of Jaime Lannister's gaze still boring into his back like a physical blade. Jaime slowly sheathed his sword, the metallic click sounding final, but the promise of violence remained. He began to walk toward the inner ward, but a flurry of blue silk caught his eye. Sansa was walking toward him, flanked by her attendants. Her expression was carefully neutral for the public eye, her little dove persona firmly back in place. "Alaric," she said, her voice poised and steady, though her blue eyes darted around as if the stones themselves had ears. "Are you quite all right?" That was a vigorous display. "I am perfectly all right, Lady Sansa," Alaric replied, bowing his head in a show of respectful duty. The prince merely slipped on the frost. "The North is a cruel place for those not born to it." Sansa gave a stiff, regal nod and turned to leave with her maids, her silk skirts rustling against the frozen earth. As she passed within inches of him, Alaric leaned forward just a fraction, his voice dropping to a low, vibrant rumble that only she could hear. "Keep your window open tonight, little dove," he muttered, the words ghosting against her ear. "I have a different kind of education in mind for my lady." Chapter 13, Sansa, Be Silent. Sansa's breath hitched, a feverish crimson flush creeping up from her collarbone, but she didn't look back as she hurried toward the keep. Alaric watched her go until her presence was safely within the stone walls. The hours ground on toward midnight, the celebratory roar of the final feast slowly fading into the heavy, wine-soaked silence of Winterfell's sleeping halls. In her chambers, Sansa Stark paced restlessly, the amber glow of the hearth flickering against her sky-blue bedgown. Every creak of the ancient stone seemed to echo her heartbeat until a sharp, distinct clack sounded against her floorboards. She froze, looking down to see a small, frost-covered stone rolling across the heavy fur rug. Her breath hitched as she hurried to the window, pushing it ajar to peer into the frigid northern night. Below, half hidden by the thick, gnarled ivy, Alaric stood in the shadows. He was looking up, his posture relaxed despite the danger, with his large hands resting possessively on his hips. The torchlight from the battlements caught the predatory glint in his eyes, the same dark confidence that had terrified Joffrey in the training yard. Sansa leaned over the sill, her face flushing crimson as she realized just how reckless he was being. She looked toward the guard towers, her mind racing with the fear of Septa Mordain or her father's guards appearing in the corridor. "Are you mad?" she mouthed, her voice a silent, desperate thread that the wind immediately swallowed. Alaric didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached into his tunic and pulled out another small stone, this one wrapped tightly in a scrap of parchment and secured with a bit of twine. With a fluid, effortless motion, he tossed it upward. The projectile whistled through the freezing air and landed with a soft thud on the plush fur rug at Sansa's feet. Sansa scrambled to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she unfurled the message. The charcoal script was jagged but clear. "Use your bed linens. Create a rope and secure it to the bedpost. The ivy is slick with frost, I need more than luck to reach you tonight." Her eyes went wide, darting from the note to the heavy oak door. The sheer audacity of the request made her heart hammer against her ribs. To any other girl it was madness, to the Lady of Winterfell it was the first real choice she had ever made for herself. She moved with frantic speed. She stripped the heavy fur covers from her feather mattress and began knotting the sturdy linen sheets together with desperate strength. She looped one end around the thick, carved bedpost of her four-poster bed and threw the other end out the window. Below, Alaric caught the makeshift rope. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing the linen and using the ancient, gnarled ivy for foothold, he began to ascend. As his fingers finally gripped the stone sill, Alaric hauled himself up and stepped into the room, the scent of midnight and wood smoke trailing behind him like a cloak. He kicked the window shut, the latch clicking with a finality that made Sansa jump. Sansa stood in the center of the room, her breath hitching as she clutched the heavy velvet of her bedgown. The amber glow of the hearth threw Alaric's shadow across her, tall and predatory, and she swallowed hard, knowing that tonight the world she knew was ending. "Are you mad?" she whispered, her voice a frantic thread of sound. "The castle is crawling with Lannisters and Baratheons. It is far more dangerous now than it ever was before. We will have more opportunities in the future, Alaric. On the road south or in the city." She spoke the words, but as she looked into his dark eyes, she saw the new, unyielding confidence that had taken root in him. She had known him as her secret lover for years, and she knew the set of his jaw too well. He wouldn't leave. Alaric didn't answer with logic or caution. He moved across the heavy fur rug, the distance between them vanishing in 2 silent strides. He reached out, his hand still holding the bite of the midnight air, and settled it firmly on her waist, pulling her flush against his leather jerkin. "The future is a lie told by men who are afraid of the present, Sansa," he rasped, his voice a low, vibrant rumble that sent a jolt of electricity through her. "I am done waiting for opportunities granted by your father or the king." Sansa's hands came to rest on his chest, her fingers curling into his armor as if trying to ground herself. She looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and filled with a raw, hungry relief that shattered her regal poise. "You are a truly infuriating man," she breathed, her courage finally catching up to her desire. Alaric's lips curled into a slow, predatory grin. "And you," he whispered, leaning down until his breath ghosted over her lips, "are a lady who has finally stopped pretending she wants to be anywhere else." Sansa looked up at him, her gaze lingering on the sharp, confident lines of his face. She felt the heat of his hand through her velvet bedgown. "You have to be silent," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the hearth. "We cannot make much noise. Septa Mordaine's ears are as sharp as a winter gale, and if we are found like this there will be no mercy for either of us." Chapter 14-20 is Sunu Sunu between Sansa and Alaric, so got to the web novel and read it. I will wait. Now welcome back and let's continue. Chapter 21, Bond Established. Back in his own Spartan quarters, Alaric collapsed onto the narrow straw pallet. He lay there in the encroaching gray light of dawn, his body heavy with the exhaustion of the night. His muscles felt like lead, and his skin still carried the faint scent of lavender mingled with the salt of hers. "System," he rasped, his eyes fixed on the timbered ceiling. "Show me what I bought with tonight's blood and sweat." The translucent interface flared to life, pulsing with a triumphant gold-rimmed light that flooded the dim room. Mission accomplished. Objective, seal the sovereign bond with Sansa Stark. Status complete. Bond established, level 1 Sansa Stark. Affection/loyalty, 100 out of 100 unwavering devotion. Effect, genetic siphon initiated. First men bloodline successfully harvested. Rewards granted. Ability unlocked, winter skin. Effect, permanent plus 20% physical strength, immunity to extreme cold. Monarch point gains. Mission completion, plus 500 MP. First claim bonus, plus 250 MP. Target satisfaction, plus 100 MP. Current balance, 1,449 MP. Alaric stared at the scrolling text, a dark, jagged grin spreading across his face. He could feel the winter's skin taking hold, the freezing draft whistling through his window, which would have previously made him shiver, now felt like a summer breeze against his bare chest. He ran a hand over his shoulder, tracing the deep bite marks Sansa had left in the heat of the moment, a physical brand of his victory. "System," he muttered, a sharp glint in his eyes. "Open blood summoning. What did Sansa's blood unlock for me?" The blue screen shimmered, reorganizing itself as it processed the data from the newly sealed bond. Blood summoning unlocked. Source, Legacy of the First Men. Available units. Ancient direwolves, 800 MP. These are not wild pups, but apex predators forged by the system. Genetically engineered for massive scale and hyperaggression, their fur is as resilient as iron mail, and their bite can crush plate armor like parchment. Blood Scout, 300 MP. Specialized soldiers with near-perfect stealth, mentally linked to the monarch. Alaric's breath hitched as he read. The thought of a beast capable of tearing a knight from his horse, or scouts who could haunt the shadows of the Red Keep and report directly to his mind, changed everything. The path to the throne was no longer a desperate dream, it was becoming a mathematical certainty. He looked at his 1,449 MP, a king's ransom. He had enough to summon a monster to guard his path or a squad of ghosts to watch his back on the treacherous road south. The road to King's Landing just got a lot shorter, Alaric smirked, his thumb tracing the jagged bite mark on his shoulder. Alaric's smirk faltered as the logistical reality of an elephant-sized wolf set in. It was a weapon of mass destruction, certainly, but he wasn't a king with a fortress yet. He was a man about to travel the King's Road in the company of vipers and high-born fools. System, he murmured, his voice dropping to a low rasp. If I summon a beast the size of a mammoth, how am I supposed to hide it? Every lord from Winterfell to the Red Keep will see it as a challenge or a prize. I'll have every assassin in the Seven Kingdoms trying to slit my throat just to claim the beast. The blue interface flickered, scrolling with a clinical efficiency that ignored his tension. System query, logistical concealment. 1. Sanguine compression, passive extension. Cost, 200 MP, one-time unlock. Description: since your summons are birthed from bloodline essence, their physical forms are mutable. This allows the direwolf to collapse its mass, shrinking to the size of a standard hunting hound. Note: in this state, power is suppressed to 70%, but the beast can burst to full size in under 3 seconds upon a mental command. 2. Integration protocol, the foreign cell's word facade. Cost, 0 MP, strategic advice. Description: unlike the beasts, blood scouts appear entirely human. They possess forged identities and memories. The system recommends introducing them as cell's words or distant kin. Their mental link ensures they will never betray this cover. Alaric leaned back against the headboard, a dry chuckle escaping his lips. A pocket-sized monster. Clever. He ran the numbers, 1,449 MP. If he bought the sanguine compression and one ancient direwolf, he would be down to 449 MP. That would still leave enough for one monarch scout to act as his eyes and ears in the camps of his enemies. His gaze darkened as he thought of the Lannisters. Cersei and Jaime weren't just guests, they were predators who had spent years turning the Red Keep into a slaughterhouse for anyone in their way. Points are worthless to a corpse, he muttered, the logic cold and undeniable. If I go south with nothing but a title and a sword, I'm just a lamb walking into a den of lions. Alaric focused on the interface, his mind made up. System, he commanded. Unlock the sanguine compression, summon one ancient direwolf and one monarch scout. Do it now. The room didn't just glow, it seemed to bleed. The golden-rimmed light of the interface began to pool on the floor, swirling like liquid mercury before taking shape. Transaction complete. Deduction, 1,300 MP. Remaining balance, 149 MP. Initiating summoning. From the shadows of the Spartan room, two figures began to manifest. One, a man with a nondescript face and sharp, observant eyes, knelt in the corner, the scout. But it was the other shape that drew Alaric's breath away. Chapter 22, Myrcella. A massive, terrifying silhouette of a wolf appeared for a fraction of a second, filling the room with the scent of forests and iron, before the sanguine compression kicked in. With a sickening sound of shifting bone, it shrank until a large black-furred hound stood before him, its eyes glowing with a faint, unnatural amber. The path south was no longer a lonely one. "I'll call you Shadow," Alaric whispered, reaching out. The wolf leaned its head into his hand. Its fur felt like soft as silk, deceptively soft over hide that he knew was as tough as plate armor. "And the other?" Alaric turned his head. In the corner of the room, a man seemed to simply materialize out of the gloom. He was lean, dressed in mottled gray and charcoal leathers that would be invisible in the brush or a dark alley. His face was unremarkable, the kind of face a person would forget 5 seconds after seeing it. "Monarch," the man said, kneeling. His voice was a rasp, barely louder than the wind. "I am your shadow on the road to greatness." Alaric grinned, a genuine, predatory expression. "Perfect. Cersei thinks she's the only one who plays with hidden daggers. She has no idea the monsters I'm bringing to her doorstep." He stood up, feeling the 20% boost in his strength surging through his limbs. He felt faster, heavier, and utterly untouchable by the cold. Alaric's fingers sank into the thick, obsidian fur of the wolf. The beast let out a low, thrumming vibration, not a growl but a purr of concentrated power. "Tomorrow," Alaric whispered, his eyes fixed on the flickering candlelight. "Tomorrow we leave the north." He felt the surge of his new strength, a heavy, restless power coiling in his muscles. The increase wasn't just physical, his senses felt sharper, his mind more calculated. He began to think of the future, not just as a survivor but as a monarch. System, he thought, leaning back as shadow settled at his feet like a dark patch of the night itself. You mentioned building structures. If I'm to be a king, I can't just live in the guest chambers of my enemies. What does it take to manifest a castle? The blue light of the interface washed over the darkened room, the text appearing with a golden hue this time. Monarch Domain, Construction. Status, Locked, requires Sovereign Rank or 5000 plus MP lifetime earnings. The Obsidian Citadel, Tier 3 Fortress. Cost, 8,000 MP. Comparison, on par with Highgarden or the Eyrie. Features, self-sustaining ecosystem, magically reinforced walls, immune to conventional siege, and a monarch's throne that amplifies MP gain by 15%. Note, can be summoned onto any unclaimed or conquered land. The foundation will root into the earth in less than 24 hours. Alaric's breath caught in his throat. 8,000 points sounded like an impossible sum, but then he looked at the 1,450 he had earned just from one mission and his encounter with Sansa. Highgarden in a day, he chuckled, the dark, jagged grin returning. The Tyrells spent centuries breeding and building to get their riches. I can summon a fortress that rivals theirs just by breaking the right people. He looked at the scout, then at the wolf. Every plot he foiled would be another brick in his future castle. Rest, Alaric commanded the scout. Shadow, stay close. Next day. The dawn over Winterfell arrived with a biting clarity, the frost clinging to the stone battlements like a shroud. Inside the guest chambers assigned to the royal family, the air was warm, perfumed with southern oils that felt out of place against the scent of old, frozen pine. Princess Myrcella Baratheon sat by the hearth while her maid, Rosamund, braided her golden hair. Myrcella was gentle and possessed a courtesy that her elder brother entirely lacked, yet she was far from unobservant. She watched the flames dance, her mind replaying the chaotic scene in the training yard from the previous evening. Is it true, Rosamund? Myrcella asked softly. Did the ward truly strike Joffrey? Rosamund leaned in, her voice a hushed whisper. They say he did more than strike him, my lady. They say he played with the prince as if he were a child with a wooden stick. Prince Joffrey was fuming when he returned to his chambers. He nearly threw a goblet at the page. Myrcella let out a small, tired sigh. She loved her brother because he was her blood, but she was not blind to his temperament. She had seen him sneer at the Northmen since they passed the Neck, treating the ancient seat of the Starks like a stable. Joffrey has always been spirited, Myrcella said carefully, choosing the kindest word available. But the men in the yard were laughing. Even Uncle Tyrion seemed amused. Who is this ward? The one who caught Bran? He didn't even look scared when Ser Jaime drew his sword, Rosamund added, finally finishing the braid. That's the problem, Myrcella said, standing up. He's a ward of a dead house with zero power, yet he acts like he owns the place. Mother's radar is a death sentence, and he is a fool if he thinks he can humiliate Joffrey and just walk away. Once Mother decides someone is a problem, they don't last long. She watched the fire, her expression darkening with genuine concern. She'll have him killed before we even see the Red Keep. He made a fool out of the future king in front of everyone. In Mother's eyes, that isn't a mistake, it's treason. She's already talking about accidents on the road. By the time we hit the bogs, he'll probably be a corpse in a ditch. Chapter 23, Sore Sansa. The heavy oak door of Sansa's chambers creaked open, admitting a flurry of nervous energy in the form of Septa Mordain and two handmaidens. Sansa remained seated at her vanity, her movements slow and deliberate as she brushed her copper hair. Every stroke felt like a monumental effort. Her body felt weighed down and a dull, pulsing heat radiated from her core, a constant physical reminder of the lessons Alaric had provided until the early hours of the morning. Sansa, child, you must hurry, Septa Mordain urged, her hands fluttering over a dress of fine silk. Prince Joffrey has requested your presence in the courtyard. He wishes to walk through the glass gardens before the departure. One of the younger maids giggled, stepping forward with a pair of soft wool hosen. They say the prince is most anxious to see you, my lady. He hasn't stopped asking for you since he broke his fast. Sansa looked at the dress, and for the first time, the thought of Joffrey's golden presence felt like a sickening intrusion. She shifted slightly on her stool and a sharp, heavy ache flared through her thighs and lower back, making her breath hitch. "No," Sansa said, her voice sounding surprisingly steady, even to her own ears. The septa froze, her mouth agape. "No? Sansa, it is the Crown Prince. One does not simply refuse a royal invitation." "I am not feeling well today, Septa," Sansa interrupted, her gaze fixed on her reflection. "The shock of Bran's accident has taken its toll. My head swims and my legs feel as though they might give way if I try to stand." "But the Queen. The Queen will surely understand that a lady of the North requires rest," Sansa said with a cold, regal finality that left no room for argument. "Tell the prince I am honored, but I shall remain in my chambers. Let him wait." As the bewildered attendants retreated, closing the heavy door behind them, Sansa's poised mask shattered. She leaned heavily against the vanity, a soft, shaky exhale escaping her lips. "How could I possibly go out there?" she thought, her face flushing a deep, feverish pink. She gingerly stood up to move toward the bed, but the moment she put weight on her feet, a rhythmic soreness flared through her lower body. She walked with a stiff, hesitant gait, her thighs feeling tight and unyielding. She collapsed back into the fresh, crisp furs of her bed, letting out a tiny, breathless moan as the ache throbbed. The sun had barely begun to touch the frost-covered battlements of Winterfell when the castle erupted into a symphony of barking dogs, shouting stable boys, and the rhythmic clanking of Stark steel. The departure for King's Landing was no longer a distant threat, it was a reality. Alaric Thorne moved through the corridors with a new, fluid grace, the winter skin making the morning chill feel like a tepid breeze. His mini-map pulsed in his peripheral vision, showing the red dots of the septa and handmaidens safely at the far end of the gallery, likely fussing over Arya's packing. He was alone. Alaric gave the door a sharp, rhythmic knock, the signal of a guard. "I told you I am resting." Sansa's voice drifted through the wood, sharp with exhaustion and irritation. "Come back when the wheelhouse is actually at the gates." Alaric didn't answer. He reached for the iron latch and, finding it unlocked, pushed the door open. He stepped inside, the heavy wood clicking shut behind him with a finality that made the room feel like a fortress. Sansa was sprawled across the bed, her copper hair a wildfire against the white furs. She didn't look up, her face buried deep in a silk pillow. "What part of resting do southern ears not understand?" she muffled into the fabric. "Perhaps it's the northern ears that are failing, little dove," Alaric rasped, his voice a low, vibrant vibration in the quiet room. Sansa bolted upright, or tried to. As she pushed herself up, a sharp, heavy ache flared through her lower body, causing her to let out a soft "oh" of surprise before collapsing back into the pillows. She looked at him, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of scandal and relief. "Alaric, what are you doing here?" she hissed, clutching a fur to her chest. "I told the septa I wouldn't be seen. If they find you inside my chambers now—" "They won't," Alaric said, leaning back against the door, his hands resting possessively on his belt. "And have you forgotten? Lord Eddard officially named me your personal guard. It is my duty to ensure the Lady of Winterfell is ready for the road." He moved toward the bed, the confidence in his stride making Sansa's heart hammer against her ribs. "The king's wheelhouse is being prepped," he continued, a dark, playful glint in his eyes. "Are you not going to get ready?" Sansa buried her face back into the pillow, her voice a low, vulnerable mumble. "I can't walk, Alaric," she confessed, her face flushing a deep, feverish crimson. "I am so sore after last night. Every time I move, I feel like I'm walking on broken stilts. How am I supposed to climb into a carriage and pretend to be a perfect lady when I can barely stand straight?" Alaric reached the edge of the mattress and sat down, the bed groaning under his weight. He reached out, his hand finding the curve of her ankle beneath the furs. "Then it's a good thing you have a knight to lean on," he whispered. Chapter 24, Sansa, help me dress. Alaric sat at the edge of the mattress, the bed groaning under his weight as he looked at the girl who had once been a distant lady and was now his. He reached out, his hand finding the curve of her ankle beneath the furs in a steady, possessive grip. "You worry too much, little dove," he murmured, his dark eyes tracing the persistent flush on her cheeks. "The South expects a delicate flower, but you are a Stark of Winterfell. You only need to hide the marks for a few hours." He gestured toward her wardrobe, his voice dropping to a commanding rasp. "Choose your heaviest travel garments, the thick wools and layered velvet skirts. If the fabric is dense and wide enough, no one will notice the stiffness in your gait or the way your body protests every step. Sansa peeked over the edge of the silk pillow, her expression clouded with uncertainty. And my father? The queen? They will expect me to glide toward the wheelhouse with the grace of a princess. Then let them be disappointed by a sickly girl, Alaric countered with a sharp grin. Lean on me. I am your sworn shield now. It is my task to carry your weight if your legs fail you. He leaned in closer, his breath ghosting over her ear. Once you are inside that carriage, you won't have to move a muscle. You can sink into the cushions and rest until we reach the first camp. The rest of the world will just see a dutiful daughter of the North departing for her future. Sansa let out a shaky breath, the heavy, pulsing ache within her a constant reminder of why she was in this state. You make it sound so simple, Alaric. It is simple, he said, standing up and offering a hand to help her from the furs. Get dressed. Alaric turned to leave, his hand already reaching for the iron latch. Before he could take a single step, he felt a small, warm hand wrap around his wrist, pulling him back with a desperate, shaky strength. Alaric, Sansa whispered, her face turning a feverish pink as she looked up from the bed. Help me dress. He froze, eyebrows shooting up in genuine surprise as he looked from her pleading eyes to the wardrobe filled with complex layers of northern finery. Sansa, I am a soldier, not a lady's maid, he rasped, a dark, amused glint in his eyes. If I stay here and try to figure out the laces of a corset, we'll both be caught before the first horse is saddled. Besides, my hands were built for other things. No buts, she interrupted, her voice a sharp, frantic thread of sound. She gripped his hand tighter, her nails digging into his skin as she ignored the dull soreness that made every movement a struggle. Just help me quickly. If I call the maids back now, they'll see how I move. They'll see the marks on my neck of your kisses. She let out a tiny, breathless huff of frustration, her regal poise flickering as she looked at her own trembling hands. Please. I can barely stand straight, and the septa will be back in heartbeats to check on my fever. If you're my knight, then do your duty and help your lady into her armor. Alaric let out a low, vibrant chuckle that rumbled through the quiet room. He didn't move toward the door this time. Instead, he turned back to the bed, his hands reaching down to gently haul her upward. As you wish, my lady, he murmured, his voice dropping to a predatory rumble. But if we're late to the king's procession, I'm telling your father the little dove insisted on one last lesson. You wouldn't dare, she gasped, even as she leaned her full weight against his chest. Her thighs still trembled with the heavy, persistent soreness he had left her with, making her reliance on him absolute. Try me, he whispered, already reaching for the thick wools he had ordered her to wear. Alaric reached down, his hands sliding under her arms to haul her gently from the mattress. Sansa let out a sharp, indrawn breath as her feet touched the floor, her legs nearly giving way. He caught her easily, pulling her flush against his chest to steady her. With slow, deliberate movements, he began to peel away the light silk shift. As the fabric fell, the amber light of the dying hearth danced over her skin, revealing the transformation of the night. She was no longer just a girl of soft edges, she possessed the radiant, lingering air of a woman who had been thoroughly claimed. Her curves seemed more pronounced in the morning light, the swell of her breasts still carried the faint marks of his possessive touch, and the graceful line of her hips bore the light bruising of his grip. There was a raw magnetism in her silhouette, a heat that seemed to pulse from her core, making her appear far more alluring than the little dove the world knew. You look different, Sansa, Alaric rasped, his eyes dark as he looked at love bites on her back and around the neck. He began the task of dressing her, his hands moving with surprising care. He helped her into the heavy wool hosen first, the fabric thick enough to hide any stiffness in her gait. Next came the layered velvet skirts, their weight providing a shield for the internal ache that flared with every small adjustment of her legs. As he tightened the last of the laces on her bodice, ensuring the collar was high enough to mask the traces of his teeth on her throat, Sansa rested her forehead against his shoulder. The long night had left her physically spent, but as she looked at him there was a fierce, unwavering devotion in her eyes that no septa could ever teach. There, Alaric murmured, stepping back to survey her. The perfect lady returns, even if she can barely walk. Sansa gave a tired, triumphant smile, brushing her copper hair over her shoulders. And the perfect knight has finished his chores. Now lead me out before my father decides to come looking for us himself. Alaric chuckled, a low, vibrant sound that hummed through the quiet room. He stepped forward and, before she could protest, scooped her up into his arms, his large hands supporting her back and thighs in a firm carry. "How about we make an entry like this?" he teased, his voice dropping an octave as he looked down at her. "I could carry you right through the courtyard for all of Winterfell and the king to see." Chapter 25, Like a Princess. Sansa gasped, the air catching sharply in her throat as her face glowed like a sunset. She instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck for stability. "Put me down," she hissed. She didn't truly struggle, her body still felt heavy and exquisitely sensitive. "Don't be dumb. You said your legs felt like broken stilts," he countered with a dark, playful glint. "I'm just being a dutiful knight, ensuring my lady doesn't collapse in the mud before reaching her carriage." "I can walk," she lied, her voice trembling as she buried her face in the crook of his neck to hide her crimson flush. "I just need your arm. If you carry me out there, it will be bad." Alaric let out a low, dry chuckle and slowly let her slide down his chest until her feet were steady on the stone floor. He offered his arm, his grip firm and possessive. "Then walk, my lady. But the moment those knees buckle, I'm picking you back up." Sansa took a final, deep breath, leaning her full weight into Alaric's side as they stood before the heavy oak door. Every small movement sent a sharp, rhythmic ache through her lower body, but his physical presence as her shield gave her a newfound sense of steel. Just as his hand reached for the iron latch to open the door to the bustling castle, she stopped him. She looked up at him, her blue eyes darting around the room one last time before dropping to a shy, breathless whisper. "Wait," she murmured, her voice trembling with a mix of lingering heat and the sudden fear of the journey ahead. Can I have a kiss before we go out? Just one?" She reached out, her fingers curling into the sleeve of his leather tunic. "My father and Evrion will be watching me constantly once we leave this room. There won't be many chances for this on the road south or even in the city." Alaric paused, the glint in his eyes softening as he looked down at the girl who was now his. He didn't answer with words, instead he wrapped a heavy arm around her waist, pinning her to his chest as he tilted her chin up. He pressed a slow, firm kiss against her lips, one that tasted of the midnight air and unyielding possession. It was a kiss meant to sustain her through the weeks of public performance and travel that lay ahead. When he finally pulled back, Sansa's face was glowing, her breath hitching as she leaned into his shoulder for support. "Now," Alaric rasped, his voice a low, vibrant rumble. "The perfect lady of Winterfell is ready." He opened the door and the chaos of the courtyard, the barking dogs, the shouting guards, and the clanking of Lannister steel, washed over them as they stepped into the cold morning light. As Alaric and Sansa stepped into the bustling courtyard, the sudden transition from the quiet warmth of her chambers to the frigid morning air made Sansa shiver. She leaned more of her weight into Alaric's sturdy frame, her body still protesting every movement. Amidst the sea of Lannister crimson and Baratheon gold, a silent shadow detached itself from a nearby stone pillar, trotting forward to fall into line behind them. Sansa's eyes widened as she caught sight of the creature. It was a jet-black wolf, larger than any hunting hound, with eyes that glowed like molten embers. Its fur looked like spun obsidian, and it moved with a terrifying, preternatural intelligence. "Alaric?" Sansa whispered, her voice trembling. "Is that your wolf? Looks fierce." Alaric glanced down at the beast. "His name is Shadow. He is only fierce to enemies, little dove. To you, he is as loyal as the stone of Winterfell. You can pet him if you like, he already knows you." Sansa hesitated, then reached out a trembling hand. Shadow did not growl, instead he leaned his massive head into her palm. His fur felt deceptively soft, masking a hide as tough as plate armor. At that moment, Lady trotted forward with her usual calm. She stopped before the black beast, her yellow eyes fixed on him. Sansa let out a soft, relieved laugh, the heavy ache in her lower body forgotten for a brief second. "Look, lady," she murmured, scratching her pup behind the ears. "You have a new friend." Lady sniffed the black wolf's muzzle and for a second. With a low, thrumming vibration of acceptance, the wolves followed Alaric and Sansa toward the waiting caravan. As they moved through the courtyard, Arya broke through a line of guards, her eyes darting between the two wolves with awe. "So, the little dove finally decided to fly out of her nest," Arya teased, though her gaze stayed fixed on Shadow. "Whose wolf is this?" "He looks like he was carved out of the night itself." Sansa, leaning heavily against Alaric as the rhythmic soreness in her core flared, offered a tired but regal smile. "His name is Shadow, Arya. He's a friend to Lady. From the gallery above, Ned Stark watched the scene, his face a mask of frozen granite. He noted how Alaric supported his daughter and the presence of the strange jet-black wolf, a creature that felt more ancient than anything in the wolfswood, but the memory of Alaric saving Bran held his tongue. Near the golden wheelhouse, Joffrey stood with a blotchy red face. His hand moved instinctively toward his sword as he watched Alaric walk with Sansa, but Jaime Lannister stepped forward, his hand resting firmly on the prince's shoulder. "Patience, your grace," Jaime murmured, his eyes locked on Alaric with a warning. "A hero's welcome is a heavy thing to carry, and the road south is long and full of accidents." Joffrey snarled but remained still, his pride burning as he watched the ward lead the Lady of Winterfell. Chapter 26 To the South. The royal caravan hummed with the final movements of departure. Arya trotted alongside the pair, her sharp eyes scanning her sister's stiff gait. "Are you sick?" Arya asked, her voice uncharacteristically soft as she watched Sansa lean heavily into Alaric. "You're walking like an old woman with rusted joints." Sansa offered a weary, regal nod, her face flushing as she felt the dull ache in her core. "A lingering fever from the shock of Bran's fall," she lied, her voice steadying as she gripped Alaric's leather-clad arm for support. Alaric guided her toward the massive, golden-roofed wheelhouse. As they reached the steps, he felt her knees buckle. With a firm grip, he hoisted her up and helped her navigate the steep climb into the velvet-padded interior. Once she was settled, he pulled the heavy silk curtains shut, shielding her from the prying eyes of the courtyard before vaulting onto his horse. Moments later, Catelyn Stark rushed to the carriage, her eyes red-rimmed. She pulled back a corner of the curtain to find Sansa enveloped in furs. "Be brave, my heart," Catelyn whispered, clutching her daughter's hand. "Listen to your septa and keep your guard close." Catelyn turned her gaze to Alaric, searching for the same reliability that had saved Bran. She stepped closer to his horse, moving away from the Lannister guards to speak in a hushed tone. "Alaric," she said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent rasp that pulled him closer. "The South doesn't remember the cold, and it has no respect for the truth. In Winterfell, a man is only as good as his word, but in the capital they use words like silk, soft enough to comfort you while they're tightening the noose. Keep Sansa safe as you swore you would. But watch over the little one too," Catelyn added, her eyes turning back to him, sharp and glass-bright with unshed tears. "They are walking into a den of vipers, and vipers do not strike in the light." Alaric looked down at the Lady of Winterfell, feeling as immovable as the mountain in his saddle. "You have my word, my lady," he replied, his voice a low rasp. "No harm will come to them while I draw breath. I know the threat we face." Catelyn nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her features, before stepping back as the great gates of Winterfell began to groan open. The wheelhouse lurched forward, its heavy wheels crunching over the frozen earth. Alaric whistled sharply and Shadow, the jet-black wolf, fell into a silent pace beside him. As the caravan passed through the gates, Alaric felt a faint pulse in his mind, the mental link to his monarch scout. The ghost was already moving through the shadows of the King's Road, miles ahead of the royal procession, marking every potential ambush Cersei Lannister might have planned. The great gates of Winterfell groaned as they swung wide, the sound rolling across the frozen valley like the low cry of a wounded giant. As the royal column lurched into motion, the heavy, gold-roofed wheelhouse led the way, its iron-shod wheels crushing the frozen rime of the earth. Alaric Thorne rode tall, his presence an anchor beside the silk-curtained window of Sansa's carriage. He kept his horse at a steady pace. Shadow moved at Alaric's stirrup, a phantom of jet-black fur that seemed to absorb the pale morning light. Beside the great wolf, Sansa's direwolf, Lady, trotted with a calm, watchful grace, keeping close to Shadow's flank as if acknowledging a new alpha. Further back, Arya's Nymeria darted between the horses, wild and restless, giving the massive black wolf a respectful berth. "He looks like he came from the dark itself," she noted, her voice small against the wind. "Where did you find a beast like that?" "He found me," Alaric replied. Further ahead in the column, the sun caught the polished gold of Jaime Lannister's armor. The Kingslayer turned in his saddle, his gaze sliding back toward Alaric, a sharp, measuring look. It was the look of a hunter who had realized the woods were no longer his alone. Inside the wheelhouse, the world was a blur of velvet and rocking timber. Sansa lay against the plush cushions, she clutched a silk pillow to her chest, the one he had returned to her, and as the rhythmic beat of hooves lulled her, she finally drifted into a heavy sleep. Mission status: the long road south has begun. Current MP, 149. The days blurred into a weary, dust-covered routine. The royal procession snaked south like a slow, golden serpent, the massive wheelhouse its heavy, plodding heart. Each night, a city of pavilions rose from the earth. Each morning, it was dismantled before the frost could melt. By the 10th day, the air had lost its bite, and the scents of the road, damp earth, horse sweat, and wood smoke, had become the new constants of their lives. Chapter 27 Ploy. One evening, as the camp settled into the rhythmic scrap of sharpening steel and the braying of tired horses, Alaric stood watch at the entrance of the Stark camp. Sansa emerged from the tent, her movements regaining their natural grace. She took a seat by a private brazier, her gaze drifting into the glowing embers. As Alaric stepped closer, his silhouette stretched thin across the frosted grass. "How much longer, Alaric?" she asked, her voice sounding thin, as if the dust of the road had finally worn it down. She looked out at the passing landscape with a hollow sort of longing. "The road feels endless, and the trees here, they look wrong. They aren't like the trees at home." Alaric adjusted his grip on the reins, his eyes scanning the tree-line before settling back on her. "We've made good time through the neck, but the King's Road is a long stretch of misery," he replied, his voice a steady, grounding rasp. "Expect another 3 weeks of this before the Red Keep rises to meet us." He nudged his horse a hair closer to the carriage window, his gaze dropping to the high, stiff collar of her travel furs, the one meant to hide his work from the morning of their departure. "Does the travel fever still trouble you, Sansa?" he asked, his voice dropping low enough that the passing guards wouldn't catch the edge in it. "Or has the soreness finally begun to fade?" She shook her head quickly, looking back toward the heat of the coals. "I feel normal now." Their quiet was broken by Arya, who trotted into the light with Nymeria at her heels. The younger girl was caked in mud to her knees, a wooden practice sword tucked under her arm. "It's too hot down here," Arya grumbled, smearing a fresh streak of mud across her forehead with the back of her hand. She narrowed her eyes at them, looking between Alaric's hand on his sword and the heat in Sansa's face. "Why are you two always whispering?" "It's dull. Nymeria and I found a pond with lizard lions, but Jory's a spoilsport and made us come back." In the shadows behind Alaric, the great black shape of Shadow let out a low, vibrating huff. Lady padded forward to meet her sister, the two wolves circling one another before settling like twin sentries at the edge of the firelight. "A lady doesn't whisper, Arya," Sansa said, her back straightening as she pulled her dignity around her. "She consults with her sworn shield on the safety of the road." "You consult like a septa mumbles her prayers," Arya shot back. She stuck her tongue out and flopped onto the grass, burying her fingers in the thick fur behind Nymeria's ears. The quiet didn't last. From the darkness of the camp's main path, the dry rustle of silk against the grass signaled a new arrival. Cersei Lannister stepped into the light, flanked by 2 Kingsguard whose white cloaks looked like pale ghosts in the gloom. Jaime walked at her side. He didn't spare a glance for the girls, his eyes were locked on Alaric with the sharp, hungry interest of a man who had finally spotted something worth killing. "A touching scene," Cersei said, her voice smooth and dangerously thin. Her gaze raked over the girls before landing on Alaric. The ward and his charges huddled in the dirt. "One might think you were afraid of the road, Stark." Alaric didn't bow. He stood his ground, the winter skin keeping the night's bite at bay. He met the Queen's eyes with a flat, unblinking stare. "The North isn't afraid of the road, Your Grace. We just prefer to keep our own fires. The Dark holds things that don't care for Lannister gold." Jaime's mouth twisted into a dry smirk. "The boy talks like a philosopher. I wonder if his wolf bites as hard as his tongue." Cersei ignored him, her eyes settling on Sansa. "The king is impatient to reach the city, Sansa. He expects his little bird to be a vision of grace when we arrive. See to it your protector doesn't keep you out in the damp for too long. It would be a shame if another fever delayed us again." Cersei's smile was a thin, sharp line that never touched her eyes. She stepped toward Sansa, her silk gown hissing against the grass. "You must learn to care for yourself, child. As your future mother-in-law, I have a vested interest in the crown's prospects. Once you wed Joffrey, such fevers become a matter of state, not merely a girl's discomfort." Sansa felt her heart thudding, but she kept her chin up. "You are too kind to worry, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady with the practiced poise of the North. Cersei turned her look back to Alaric, her expression hardening. A dutiful guard, she mused. Though I wonder, Lord Thorne, if you understand the price of overstepping with a future queen. In the south we are quite protective of our treasures. In the north, your grace, we protect what is ours with more than words, Alaric said. He didn't raise his voice, but the rasp of it was enough to make Jaime's hand tighten on his hilt. Jaime stepped into the light, letting out a short, dangerous laugh. He has a bite, Queen. Perhaps he thinks having a big black dog makes him a wolf. He gestured vaguely toward the darkness of the King's Road. The road is long. Accidents find heroes every day. Be careful you don't trip in the dark, Thorne. I see well enough in the dark, Sir Jaime, Alaric replied. He could feel the familiar pulse in the back of his mind, a connection to the scout he had positioned a mile ahead. And I rarely travel alone. Shadow rose slowly. The black wolf didn't growl, he simply vibrated, a low thrum that seemed to come from the earth itself. The two King's Guard shifted their weight, hands hovering near their swords. Cersei's eyes narrowed. We shall see how well you see when the sun sets on the Trident, she whispered. She turned on her heel, her golden hair catching the firelight one last time. Jaime followed, casting a final, measuring look at Alaric, the look of a man who no longer saw a lucky ward, but a problem that needed solving. Alaric watched the gold and crimson shadows bleed into the gloom of the camp. He stood like a statue of northern stone, but his mind was moving with cold detachment. Why? Cersei was a narcissist and Jaime was arrogant, but they weren't fools. They were the most powerful players in the Seven Kingdoms. Why go out of their way to personally provoke a ward? To tell a man accidents happen to his face felt performative. It felt like a distraction. Chapter 28, Butcher Boy. Alaric's gaze remained fixed on the darkness where the Queen's golden head had vanished. The prickle of unease at the back of his neck wasn't from the cold, it was the realization that he had been looking for the wrong kind of blade. Cersei didn't do anything without a purpose, and Jaime didn't threaten common wards unless they were already in his sights. Her mention of the fever, the way she let the word hang in the air like a foul scent, made his stomach turn. It hit him then, a cold realization that made his blood feel like slush. She wasn't just guessing, she was hunting. She suspected there was something between him and Sansa. She had seen the way they stood together. He had been so focused on an ambush, preparing for steel in the night or a bandit attack on the road, that he had completely ignored the most dangerous weapon in a Lannister's arsenal, a lie. It wouldn't be hard for them. In the north, a man's word was his life, but in King's Landing, truth was whatever the Queen said it was. They didn't need to kill him in a fair fight. They just needed to accuse him. He looked at Sansa's pale, delicate profile as she stared into the dying fire. If they accused him of overstepping, of forcing himself on the future queen, there would be no trial. Robert Baratheon, in his cups and his rages, would call for Alaric's head before the sun set. Even worse, they could use the Princess Myrcella. A single scream from a tent, a well-placed witness, and Alaric Thorne would be transformed from a sworn shield into a monster in the eyes of the entire realm. In that city of vipers, his strength wouldn't save him. Shadow could tear out 20 throats, and the other guards might die to protect him, but what then? He'd be a fugitive, an exile, and Sansa's reputation would be scorched to ash alongside him. The Starks would be too shamed to even lift a banner in his defense. He had been measuring his power in terms of how many men he could kill. He hadn't realized that the Lannisters were measuring his life in terms of how easily they could ruin it. Alaric? Sansa's voice broke through his spiral of thought. She reached out, her fingers just barely touching his sleeve. You've gone so quiet. Your eyes, you look like you're miles away. Alaric forced his breathing to slow, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword until the leather creaked. He looked down at her, seeing not just a girl he cared for, but the target Cersei had painted on both their backs. I'm right here, Sansa, he said, his voice a low, rough grate. But the road just got a lot shorter. We need to be careful. Alaric did not look back at the warmth of the fire, instead fixing his gaze on the flickering Lannister torches in the distance. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He had been playing the game of soldiers, while Cersei was playing the game of reputations. He would not make that mistake again. Inside his mind, he connected to Blood Scout. The massive golden wheelhouse and its trailing caravan finally ground to a halt at the banks of the Trident. Here, the air hung heavy with the scent of river mud and crushed grass, a humid, stifling change from the crisp, frozen pine of the north. Near the Ruby Ford, Sansa walked the riverbank with her chin held high. Her stiff northern collar served a dual purpose, maintaining her dignity and concealing the marks Alaric had left upon her skin. Beside her, Joffrey strutted with the vanity of a peacock. The sunlight caught his golden hair as he droned on about the supposed glories of King's Landing. "When we arrive, my lady, I shall command a tourney in your honor," Joffrey boasted, his voice thin and reedy. "I shall unhorse every knight who dares to even look upon you." "You are too kind, your grace," Sansa replied. Her voice was a flat, practiced mask of courtly grace, though beneath the surface, her stomach churned with revulsion. Joffrey's eyes flicked dismissively toward Alaric. "And once we are wed, I'll see you assigned a proper guard. We can send this dog of yours back to the north where he belongs." Alaric heard the barb but remained indifferent. He felt no need for pride, he knew exactly what the future held for the prince. For now, Joffrey was nothing more than a convenient source for MP harvesting. He would endure the boy's arrogance a little longer, knowing the scales would soon tip. Sansa merely nodded, following Alaric's specific instructions to agree with everything the prince said to keep the peace. The quiet of the river was shattered as they rounded a bend into a clearing. There stood Arya, caked in dried mud, swinging a heavy wooden branch against the butcher's boy Micah. "Stop this at once!" Joffrey shrieked, his face flushing a blotchy, indignant red. He drew Lion's Tooth, the steel flashing with lethal, unearned malice. "A peasant striking a lady of the blood? I'll have your hand for this, boy." Joffrey advanced on the butcher's boy with a slow, predatory gait. Micah stood frozen, his face pale beneath a layer of river silt. From behind the prince, Sansa watched with a simmering revulsion she could barely contain. Every step Joffrey took made her skin crawl. The point of Lion's Tooth leveled at Micah's cheek. The boy was trembling so violently that his wooden switch slipped from his fingers and clattered into the mud. "I didn't hit her, M-Lord," he whimpered. "We was only playing." "Don't call him M-Lord," Arya snapped, her jaw set. "He's a prince and he's a liar." Micah did nothing. Joffrey didn't even look at her. A cruel, thin sneer touched his lips as he pressed the steel into the boy's skin. A single bead of crimson bloomed against the gray mud on Micah's face. "I wonder," Joffrey mused, his voice dropping to a cold whisper, "if a butcher's boy bleeds like a pig." "Leave him alone," Arya screamed. She lunged. Using both hands, she swung her wooden branch in a desperate arc. It connected with the back of Joffrey's head with a dull, sickening crack. The prince gasped, stumbling into the reeds. When he spun back around, his face was distorted, a mask of sheer, humiliated fury. "You hit me," he breathed, his voice cracking with indignity. "You filthy little," he lunged, swinging the live steel of Lion's Tooth in a wild, lethal sweep. Sansa stood paralyzed. She knew the weight of the law and the lethal reach of the Lannisters. This is death, she thought, her pulse thundering in her ears. She's striking the crown prince. "Arya, run!" Sansa's cry was lost, drowned out by a low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very earth. A gray blur erupted from the brush. Nymeria didn't snarl or snap, she simply launched. The direwolf's jaws clamped onto Joffrey's sword arm with a bone-deep crunch. The sound that tore from the prince's throat was no longer human, it was the thin, pathetic shriek of a terrified child. "Get it off! Get it off me!" Joffrey wailed, his sword falling forgotten into the muck as he collapsed to his knees, his golden finery dragging in the dirt. Chapter 29, Trial. Arya didn't hesitate. She snatched Lion's Tooth from the muck and hurled it with all her strength into the rushing currents of the Trident. "Run, Micah! Run!" she screamed. Seeing the blood soaking Joffrey's silk sleeve and the raw terror in his eyes, she whistled sharply. Nymeria released her hold and together, girl and wolf vanished into the dense thicket. A horrific silence fell over the clearing, punctured only by Joffrey's ragged sobbing. Sansa stood rooted to the spot, her face ashen. She turned to Alaric, her eyes wide with the realization of the nightmare ahead. This was no longer a childhood squabble, it was an act of treason against the crown. Alaric remained unervingly calm, his gaze fixed on the weeping prince. A flicker of light shimmered in his mind's eye, MP points harvested, high conflict detected. He knew that while the wolf had bitten the boy, the political fallout would bite the Starks far deeper. "Your Grace." Sansa finally found her voice. She rushed forward with a mask of frantic concern that expertly veiled her loathing. "Are you hurt? Please let me help." Joffrey shoved her away with his uninjured arm, his face twisted in a mask of tears and humiliation. "Don't touch me. You saw it. I'll have her killed. I'll have them all executed." The heavy thud of Lannister boots soon echoed through the brush, preceded by the frantic shouting of Ser Boros Blunt. As the red-cloaked guards burst into the clearing, they found the Crown Prince huddled in the mud, clutching a mangled arm, while Sansa Stark stood trembling over him. "Prince Joffrey!" Ser Boros cried, his face paling as he drew his sword, looking wildly for an enemy to strike. Alaric moved before the guards could orient themselves. He didn't reach for his steel. Instead, he dropped to one knee beside the boy, his expression a masterpiece of feigned horror. "Your Grace. Stay still, the wound must be bound," Alaric commanded, his voice thick with a calculated, urgent panic. He moved with practiced speed, tearing a strip of fine linen from his undershirt. As he reached for the mangled arm, Joffrey shrieked, lashing out blindly. "Get away from me, you northern beast!" Alaric caught the prince's good hand, gripping it firmly under the guise of steadying him. "I am here, my prince. You're safe. Ser Boros. Secure the perimeter. The wolf is still in the woods." The Lannister guards, eager for a target they could actually fight, scrambled toward the tree-lean. Their distraction bought Alaric the second he needed. As he leaned over Joffrey to wrap the makeshift bandage, his face came inches from the prince's. The worried expression remained for the guards, but his eyes, cold, predatory, and humming with a faint, unnatural light, locked onto Joffrey's. King Robert sat in a borrowed chair that groaned under his weight. Beside him, Cersei stood as a pillar of cold fury, her emerald eyes fixed on Ned Stark with predatory focus. Alaric stood a pace behind Sansa, his posture the image of a dutiful protector. Within his mind, the monarch system pulsed with a steady, clinical thrum. Current objective: navigate the Ruby Ford inquiry. Condition: high-stakes social manipulation. MP reward: plus 450 conflict, fear, deceit. The girl must be punished, Ned. Cersei's voice was a razor-sharp whisper. Your daughter's animal savaged the prince. Look at him. Joffrey sat swathed in silks, his arm cradled in a thick sling. He played the martyr with nauseating precision, though for a fleeting second, his eyes shifted from feigned agony to a gloating, ugly triumph as he looked at Sansa. It wasn't like that. Arya shouted, her voice cracking. She stood in the center of the room, mud-stained and small, yet entirely defiant. He was hurting Micah. He drew blood first. Silence. Robert roared, slamming a fist onto the table so hard his wine slopped over the rim. He turned his gaze to Sansa. Sansa, girl. You were there. Tell us what happened. The truth now. The room went deathly quiet. Every eye turned toward her. Alaric felt the girl's slight frame tremble. This was the trap Cersei had set, the moment Sansa would be forced to choose between her family and her future crown. Alaric leaned in, the movement so subtle it seemed a mere adjustment of his stance. As his fingers brushed the back of Sansa's hand, Sansa stepped forward, her face a mask of pale marble. Her voice wavered, then steadied. Everything happened so fast. It was a blur of shadows and noise. I saw the prince and my sister talking, and then there was a dog and screaming. I was so frightened, Your Grace. I closed my eyes and prayed. A collective breath was released. It was a masterpiece of courtly nothing. She hadn't lied for Arya, but she hadn't confirmed Joffrey's story either. Cersei's eyes narrowed. You saw nothing? Your own sister is accused of a crime against the crown and you saw nothing? The girl is terrified, Cersei, Robert grumbled, clearly wanting the affair to end. She didn't see. Leave it be. I saw. Joffrey piped up, his voice oily. I saw Thorne. He encouraged the wolf. He held me down while the beast bit me. The shift was instantaneous. Lannister guards shifted their weight toward their hilts. Ned Stark's hand moved toward the pommel of his sword. Alaric didn't blink. He stepped forward with a fluid grace that made the knights around him look clumsy. He dropped to one knee before the king, his head bowed just enough to show respect without hiding the sharp clarity of his features. Your Grace, Alaric said, his voice resonating with calm authority. The prince is understandably shaken. In the chaos, his memory has played a cruel trick on him. When I arrived, I drove the wolf off. I bound his wound with my own linen while Ser Boros and his men searched the brush. He's lying. Joffrey shrieked. Alaric felt a sharp, hollow drain on his MP reserves as he commanded the system to weave a thread of suggestion. He locked his gaze onto Ser Boros Blunt, forcing the directive into the knight's sluggish mind until the man's own memories began to soften and bend like warm wax. It's easy with a man like Blunt, Alaric thought, his pulse thrumming behind his eyes. A mind fueled by wine and fear has no walls. He glanced toward Cersei, whose green eyes remained sharp as a cat's. He knew the cost of a mental nudge was not fixed, it scaled with the weight of the target's soul. To touch the mind of a fucker like Cersei, or a man as stubborn as Ned Stark, would likely cost a minimum of 1,000 MP, a sum that would leave him empty and vulnerable. Their standing in the world acted as a natural fortification, one that he wasn't yet strong enough to breach without bankrupting his future. Enough. Robert barked, his voice echoing off the timbered walls. Blunt? You were there, man. When you arrived, what did you see? Boros fumbled, his face reddening as he felt a strange fog-like pressure at the back of his skull. He blinked, a sudden certainty overriding his own murky memory of the chaos. He looked at Alaric, then at the king, the truth locking into place under the weight of Alaric's mental nudge. The ward was with the prince, your grace, Boros stammered, his confusion masked by a sudden nod of conviction. He was tending the wound. Just as he said. He was the only one who seemed to have his wits about him. Robert threw his hands up. There. A northern ward saves my son's arm while my own king's guard wanders in the weeds. If there was a conspiracy, Thorne wouldn't have been the one playing surgeon. Chapter 30 Queen. Shut up. Cersei's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her pale cheek. She had lost the opening to execute the northern filth, but she was far from finished. If the girl's wolf cannot be found, Cersei said, her voice dropping to a low predatory purr, then we have another. A direwolf is a direwolf. The words fell like a shroud over the room. Ned Stark's face hardened into stone. Beside Alaric, Sansa let out a choked gasp, her hand flying to her throat as if she could feel the pulse of Lady's life rhythmically fading. Alaric didn't wait for Ned to find his voice. He stood up slowly, his movements so precise and devoid of fear that the nearby Lannister guards instinctively recoiled. He didn't look at the queen with anger, he looked at her with pity. A direwolf is a direwolf? Alaric repeated, his voice smooth as silk but carrying the weight of a falling hammer. With all respect to the crown, your grace, that logic is curiously hollow. The silence in the room was so absolute that the crackle of the hearth sounded like a thunderclap. Cersei's eyes flared. You dare question the queen? I question the precedent, your grace, Alaric said, taking a measured step toward the center of the hall. He kept his hands visible and relaxed, the posture of a man explaining the weather to a child. By that same reasoning, if a Kingsguard knight were to commit a crime and flee, should we execute Ser Boros simply because a knight is a knight? If a Lannister bannerman rebels, must we put the queen to the sword because a Lannister is a Lannister? You overstep, Ward, Jaime Lannister warned, his hand shifting toward his gilded hilt. I am speaking of the king's justice, Ser Jaime, Alaric countered, turning his gaze to Robert, who was watching the exchange with growing agitation. Your grace, lady was nowhere near the river. She has never bared a tooth at a soul. To execute her for the crime of her breed is not justice. It is an admission of fear. He turned back to Cersei, his eyes narrowing. Is that the story the crown once told? That the royal family is so terrified of a pet that they must slaughter a different animal to feel secure? The singers would have a field day, the lion so frightened by a wolf that wasn't there. Cersei's face flushed a deep, indignant red. It is about the danger. The beasts are wild. Lady is as wild as a lapdog, and you know it, Alaric interrupted, his voice dropping into a low, vibrating register that seemed to rattle the wine goblets. Killing her won't punish Arya. It will only signal to the realm that the prince was bested by a child, and the only way to reclaim his honor is to butcher an innocent creature miles away from the fight. It makes the prince look weak. It makes the queen look petty. And it makes the king look like he can be led by the nose into a nursery spat. Robert's eyes snapped to Alaric. The word weak had landed with the precision of a warhammer. The king loathed the perception of being a puppet, and he loathed Joffrey's entitlement even more. System notification, logic critical hit. MP harvested, plus 300 public humiliation / Lannister pride. Robert, are you truly going to let this servant lecture us on honor? Cersei's voice rose from a whisper to a jagged edge. She turned on the king, her eyes wild with the sting of public shame. He has insulted your son. He has mocked the very justice of the Seven Kingdoms. Robert's jaw worked, his face deepening into a dangerous, bloated shade of purple. He wasn't looking at Alaric anymore, he was staring at Cersei, the vein in his temple throbbing in time with his mounting rage. "The boy has a sharp tongue, Cersei, but it speaks more sense than I've heard all day," Robert grumbled, reaching for his wine with a trembling hand. "Sense?" Cersei hissed, slamming her palms onto the table. The goblets jumped at the impact. "He is a northern savage defending a northern beast. If you won't take the wolf's head, then give me the boy's. He has slandered the prince's courage. Shut up, woman." Robert's roar shook the very dust from the rafters. He surged to his feet, sending his heavy chair crashing backward. The room went deathly, terrifyingly still. "I am sick to death of your screeching." Robert spat, his voice thick with a decade of resentment. "I have a kingdom to run and a road to travel. Since we reached the Trident, all I've heard is your damn vanity. The wolf didn't do it, and the other one is gone. I will not butcher a pet to soothe your pride. Robert, the prince's honor. The prince's honor is in the dirt because he let a little girl and a butcher's boy get the better of him." Robert barked, casting a look of pure disgust at Joffrey. The prince shrank back into his silks, suddenly looking very small. "Now get out. Take the boy and get out of my sight before I do something we both regret." "Out!" Cersei stood frozen. The Queen of the Seven Kingdoms had been dismissed like a common scold in front of her enemies and the Northern Ward, who had orchestrated her humiliation. She looked toward Ned Stark, who had remained a silent, steady sentinel throughout the storm. Ned finally spoke, his voice quiet, heavy, and final. "The matter is settled, Your Grace. The wolf stays. My ward has spoken the truth, even if he did so with a lack of courtly grace." Ned's support was the final blow. Standing together, Robert and Ned were a wall the Lannisters could not yet breach. Cersei's eyes darted to Alaric. In that look lived a promise of fire and blood. Without a word, she seized Joffrey's good arm, hard enough to draw a whimper, and swept from the room. Jaime followed, his expression one of golden indifference, though his eyes lingered on Alaric's throat as if measuring it for a blade. As the heavy doors thudded shut, Robert slumped into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "Seven hells, Ned. Why did I ever leave the north?" Alaric remained on one knee until the king gave a dismissive wave. "MP harvested, plus 1,000 total dominance over the queen." Sansa was trembling, but a new light shone in her eyes. It wasn't just the relief of Lady's safety, it was the realization that in a world of vipers and drunken kings, she had a protector who could outmaneuver the devil herself. Alaric rose, his gaze meeting Ned Stark's. The Lord of Winterfell's eyes were searching, filled with a volatile mix of gratitude and a new suspicion. "Alaric," Ned said, his voice low and weary. "Go. Take Sansa and the wolf back to the tents." "As you command, my lord," Alaric replied, the picture of the perfect ward. As he walked with Sansa and Arya toward their tent, a voice suddenly echoed in his head. Chapter 31, Butcher Boy Saved. As they walked toward the Stark pavilion, a voice resonated in the back of Alaric's mind, cold and precise. "Great monarch, it is done. The butcher's boy is on the path to Winterfell. I have led the hound on a false trail. By the time he realizes the deception, the boy will be long gone." He did not reply to the scout as he kept on walking. The humid night air of the Riverlands offered little relief from the adrenaline of the confrontation they had just survived. When they reached the edge of the camp, the silence between the two sisters was heavy. Arya, her face smeared with soot and sweat, stopped short of the entrance. She wouldn't go inside. Instead, she claimed a weather-worn stump, her small fingers white-knuckled around her whetstone and the hilt of needle. She stared into the black maw of the tree-lean, her jaw set with a grim resolve that was the ghost of Ned Stark's own expression. After hours spent being hunted through the brush, the thought of 4 canvas walls felt less like a shelter and more like a trap. Alaric gave her a short, silent nod. Arya caught his eye, offering a rare, fleeting look of respect before he turned to usher Sansa through the heavy velvet curtains of the tent. As soon as the fabric fell shut, cutting off the campfires and replacing them with the dim amber glow of the lanterns, Sansa's composure disintegrated. She didn't scream or wail, she simply broke. She fell against Alaric's chest, her body racked by tremors so violent they felt like a fever chill. Her fingers dug into the wool of his tunic, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world turned to glass. She wept with a desperate, muffled intensity, her breath coming in jagged hitches, terrified that even a sob might reach the queen's ears. Alaric pulled her close, his hands steady against the small of her back. He could feel her heart racing, a frantic beat against his own ribs. "Easy," he murmured, his voice dropping into a low, grounding tone. "It's over. Look at me, Sansa. Everyone is safe. Lady is unharmed and Arya is right outside. No one is coming for them." She looked up, her blue eyes clouded with tears and exhaustion. Alaric didn't wait for her to find her words. He leaned down and kissed her, a long, firm pressure that tasted of salt and the lingering fear of the day. Sansa froze for a heartbeat, the shock of it stilled her breath, but then she softened. Her eyes drifted shut as she wound her arms around his neck. Alaric moved his hands from her waist to her thighs, lifting her with a sudden, effortless strength. Sansa let out a soft, sharp gasp, her legs instinctively locking around his hips as he backed her against the wooden center pole of the pavilion. He looked up at her, the usual hardness of his features giving way to a rare, faint smile. "Enough tears," he said, his voice a low, steady thrum. "Are you not a lady of the north? A high-born lady doesn't weep over a defeated queen. She keeps her chin up and lets the world wonder why she's smiling." A watery, breathless laugh escaped her, the suffocating weight of the day finally lifting. She nodded, wiping the salt from her cheeks with the back of her hand. Looking down at him, the fear and duty that usually governed her life felt 1,000 miles away, replaced by something far more real. "I love you, Alaric," she whispered, her voice fragile but certain. Alaric leaned in until his breath grazed her ear. "I love you too," he answered, the words barely more than a ghost of a sound. Then his tone sharpened with a playful, warning edge. "But we're playing a risky game. Your sister is sitting 5 feet away and she hears like a wolf. If we're caught now, even Robert Baratheon won't be able to save me from your dad." Sansa flushed. She glanced toward the tent flap, almost feeling Arya's suspicious gaze burning through the fabric. She slowly unhooked her legs and let him slide her back to the floor, though her hands lingered on his chest, reluctant to break the contact. System notification, affection level critical, Sansa Stark. New status, soulbound secret. MP harvested, plus 500. Outside, the rhythmic scrape of the whetstone stopped dead. "Alaric?" Arya's muffled voice called out. "Is she done leaking from her eyes yet?" Sansa practically jumped back, smoothing her skirts with frantic, trembling hands. Alaric's face transformed instantly. The warmth vanished, replaced by the cool, professional mask of a man who had been doing nothing more than standing guard. He gave Sansa's hand a final, firm squeeze, a silent promise, before stepping toward the entrance. With a fluid pull, he drew back the heavy curtain, letting the crisp night air sweep out the stifling heat of the tent. Arya stood silhouetted against the orange glow of the campfires. She looked at Alaric for a long, quiet moment, her eyes searching his face for any crack in the armor. He met her gaze with the stillness of a frozen lake. Finally, she brushed past him. Sansa was standing by the center pole, her face still flushed but her back straight. The two sisters stood in the dim light, one a polished stone, the other a jagged blade. "Sansa," Arya began, her voice unusually small. She looked down at her mud-caked boots, then back up, her eyes bright with a rare, stinging guilt. I'm sorry. For all of it." Sansa blinked, her mouth parting in genuine surprise. The apology was a rare fracture in Arya's iron-willed exterior. "It was all because of me," Arya hurried on, the confession tumbling out in a rush. "If I hadn't hit Joffrey, if I hadn't run, the queen wouldn't have come for Lady. I was just so angry and I didn't think. I didn't mean for any of this to fall on your head." Sansa reached out and took Arya's hand, her thumb tracing her sister's knuckles. She gave Arya's hand a firm, forgiving squeeze, and for the first time in weeks, the air between the Stark girls was clear. When the sisters finally retreated to their furs for a fitful sleep, Alaric took his post outside. As Arya turned her back to settle in, Sansa leaned through the tent flap one last time. With a quick, playful glint in her eyes, she reached out and gave Alaric's cheek a sharp pinch before vanishing back into the amber glow of the lanterns. Alaric remained in the cool night air, the ghost of a smile touching his lips as he looked toward the shadows where shadow kept watch. The days that followed blurred into a weary rhythm of creaking timber and shifting dust. Cersei Lannister remained a phantom behind the silk curtains of the wheelhouse. Her silence wasn't peace, but the calculated patience of a predator. Chapter 32, King's Landing. Alaric didn't waste the time. He found windows of opportunity, 3 or 4 midnight meetings, to deepen the sovereign bond with Sansa, harvesting a steady stream of monarch points. By the time the air lost its northern bite and grew thick with the cloying, salty stench of the Blackwater, Sansa had recovered. She walked with a regal, measured grace that felt less like a performance and more like a suit of armor. Finally, the massive walls of King's Landing loomed. The pale red stone of the keep glowed in the afternoon sun like a fresh wound. Alaric rode tall beside the window of Sansa's carriage, shadow at his stirrup, amber eyes fixed on the city gates. As the heavy wheels crunched onto the stone road, a pulse thrummed in Alaric's mind, a signal from his scout. They had arrived, but the real battle was only just beginning. A translucent blue interface flared to life in his peripheral vision, shimmering with a cold, triumphant light. System notification. Location: King's Landing. Current monarch balance: 2,945 MP. Alaric stared at the pulsing number. For weeks he had hoarded every point earned from his defiance at the Trident and his secret encounters with Sansa. In the Red Keep, steel alone wouldn't be enough. He needed more power to survive these snakes. His eyes sweeping over the gold-cloaked city watch and the teeming crowds of the Mud Gate. The Red Keep loomed above, a jagged silhouette of Lannister influence. He needed somewhere private. As the Stark retinue was guided toward the Tower of the Hand, Alaric maintained his mask of professional indifference. He helped Sansa from her carriage, his hand lingering just long enough for her to feel his presence before he stepped back into the role of her silent, lethal shield. Once the girls were safely settled under the watchful eye of his blood scout, Alaric retreated to his assigned quarters in the lower barracks. He waited until the heavy oak door clicked shut and the chaotic roar of King's Landing faded into a distant, muffled thrum. Shadow settled at his feet, the wolf's amber eyes the only light in the dim, cramped room. System, Alaric whispered, his voice barely a breath. Open the attribute and summoning menus. Let's see what this hoarding was for. The blue interface flared to life, filling his vision with cold, glowing data. Current balance: 2,945 MP. He looked at the total, a fortune earned through calculated risks, narrow escapes, and his growing bond with Sansa. It had been worth the danger. Now he scanned the primary attributes. Vigor, baseline energy and daily vitality. It determines how active you stay and how quickly you recover from stress, work, or illness. Endurance, sustained physical stamina. It measures how long you can perform labor or aerobic exercise like running without needing rest. Dexterity, coordination, and fine motor skills. It covers hand-eye control and precision for tasks like typing, drawing, or using tools. Strength, raw physical power. The capacity of your muscles to lift, push, pull, or carry heavy weight. He weighed his options carefully. In King's Landing, poison was as common as wine. The resistance granted by vigor was a requirement for survival. Yet he could not neglect strength. He needed the power to end a fight before it truly began. He chose caution, holding back a portion of his points for abilities that might unlock with his next sovereign bond. Increase endurance by 4 and strength by 6, he commanded. Endurance plus 4, 1 year of training equivalent, equals 400 MP. Strength plus 6, 1.5 years of training equivalent, equals 600 MP. Confirm transaction? Confirm. Transaction complete. Deduction, 1,000 MP. Current balance, 1,945 MP. Initiating physical restructuring. The air in the room grew heavy, as if the weight of the Red Keep itself had pressed down on him. Alaric's breath caught as heat flared deep in his bones. This was not natural growth. It was 18 months of relentless training forced into a single moment. His lungs expanded first. Breath came easier, deeper. Fatigue pulled back like a retreating tide. His body learned how to endure, to fight longer, march farther, and stay upright when others would collapse. Then the strain shifted. Muscle fibers tore and fused again, tighter and stronger. Power settled into his shoulders, back, and legs. Not bulk, but purpose. Each movement felt cleaner. Each step carried weight. With the increase to strength, every strike now carried more force. Blows that once staggered would now break guards. A single clean hit could end a fight before it turned chaotic. Endurance followed beneath it all, steady and unforgiving. He could last longer in armor, recover faster between clashes, and keep fighting when pain set in. Combined with the plus 20% boost from his winter skin passive, the change was impossible to ignore. He was no longer just a trained guard with good instincts. He was becoming a soldier built for prolonged violence. Alaric wiped the sweat from his brow. His hand closed around the sword hilt, the balance feeling natural, solid. He was ready. When the light of the interface finally dimmed, Alaric stood. The straw pallet beneath him groaned under his increased density. He looked at his hands, they were steadier, heavier. He felt as though he could run from the gates of kings, landing back to the wall without ever stopping for air. With his winter skin providing that permanent plus 20% force multiplier, he should be already at Kingsguard level. His gaze fell to Shadow. The jet-black wolf lay at his feet. While sanguine compression allowed the beast to shrink to the size of a standard hunting hound, it was still a physical target, something that could be tracked, poisoned, or barred from certain rooms in the Red Keep. System, Alaric thought, is there an extension for Shadow? I need him to be more discreet. The blue interface flared to life, text scrolling with its usual clinical efficiency. System query, unit extension Ancient Direwolf. Extension, Umberland Dwelling. Cost, 400 Monarch Points MP. Description, through the manipulation of the Monarch's sanguine essence, the beast's physical form is tethered to the host's literal shadow. Effect, allows Shadow to merge into Alaric's shadow, becoming entirely two-dimensional and undetectable by sight or scent. Utility, the beast can emerge instantly from the shadow to strike, maintaining 100% power upon manifestation. Secondary effect, grants a passive vigilance boost. The beast can sense threats from all angles and relay them through the mental link. Alaric stared at the prompt, a dark, satisfied grin spreading across his face. In a city where little birds watched from every crevice, having a silent apex predator living in his very shadow was the ultimate insurance policy. Confirm purchase, he muttered. Deduction, 400 MP. Current balance, 1,545 MP. Chapter 33, Umberland Dwelling and Reveal. Deduction, 400 MP. Current balance, 1,545 MP. At his feet, Shadow didn't growl or whimper. Instead, the wolf's physical form began to blur, turning into a wispy, ink-like smoke that flowed toward Alaric's feet. Within seconds, the wolf was gone. Only Alaric's own shadow remained on the stone floor, though it appeared unnaturally dark, and as he turned, the shadow seemed to flicker with a pair of molten amber eyes before settling into stillness. Alaric felt the vigilance boost click into place. He could feel the hallway outside through Shadow's senses, perceiving the subtle vibrations of a guard's boots 3 doors down. Perfect, he whispered, watching his own shadow flicker against the stone wall. Notification, extension protocols must be purchased for each summon category. Purchasing Umberland Dwelling 4 Blood Scouts will apply the effect to all current and future units within that specific class. Good, he muttered. He moved through the corridors of the Tower of the Hand. The surge in his attributes had sharpened his senses to a next level. As Sansa's personal guard, he bypassed the outer sentries with a sharp, respectful nod. When the door to her chambers clicked shut, the room was bathed in the warm, flickering glow of the hearth. Sansa stood by the fire, her regal poise momentarily slipping when she saw the G-set of his jaw. "Alaric," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is it? You look as though you've seen a ghost." "Sansa, sit," Alaric said. His voice was a low, vibrant rumble that brooked no argument. "Why are you speaking like this?" she asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. She retreated to the edge of the large feather mattress, her eyes wide with a growing, cold apprehension. She hadn't seen him speak in such a serious tone in her lifetime. Either he is normal or teasing, not serious with her. Alaric pulled a heavy wooden chair close to the bed. He sat down and took her small, warm hand in his own grip. He could feel her pulse racing, a frantic staccato against his palm. "I have wanted to tell you this for a long time," he began, his expression hardening into a mask of intense gravity. "But the road was long and the Queen's eyes were always upon us. Here in this place the truth is the only armor we have left." Sansa leaned in, her breath hitching as the weight of his words pressed in on her. "You're frightening me, Alaric," she murmured, her blue eyes searching his face for any trace of the familiar, comforting confidence he usually wore. Alaric's grip tightened on Sansa's hand. The heat of his palm was the only thing keeping her anchored as his words began to tear the world away from her. "Do you remember Winterfell, Sansa? That night Bran fell from the broken tower?" She gave a slow, hesitant nod. A faint shiver traced through her eyes. "He was climbing, he lost his footing because of the ice," she whispered, holding onto the story like a shield. "No," Alaric said. The word was sharp, final. "He didn't slip. He was pushed." He didn't give her time to process it. Bran saw something he wasn't meant to see. He found the Queen and Ser Jaime together in that tower. Together as no brother and sister should ever be. The blood left Sansa's face, leaving her skin as pale as the stone walls around them. In the dim, flickering lantern light, she looked fragile, like glass about to crack. "Together? You mean?" "I mean the king has been a fool for 17 years. Alaric rasped, a dark, bitter ghost of a smile touching his mouth. "Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, none of them are Robert's blood. They're bastards born of incest." Sansa sat there, paralyzed, drawing in sharp, panicked breaths. The world she'd built out of songs and chivalry was rotting right in front of her. "I'm the one who silenced Bran," Alaric said, his voice turning cold and flat. "I made him swear to keep quiet. If the truth had broken out at Winterfell, the king would have started a war right there in our courtyard, and many would have died." In truth, Alaric had no way of knowing how the situation would have spiraled had Cersei and Jaime been caught or killed. At the time, he wasn't yet strong enough to handle the fallout, let alone influence the chaos that would have followed. Sansa's fingers bunched into the heavy velvet of her gown. "Why tell me? Why now?" "Because the Lannisters know I was there. They know I'm the one variable they can't buy. The Queen wants me dead, Sansa. I could be poisoned at dinner or find a blade in my ribs in some dark alley tomorrow. I am probably on top of Cersei Lannister hit list." Sansa went quiet, a heavy, suffocating silence, before the shaking started. "This is too much," she stammered, her voice thin and bordering on hysteria. "You have to leave. I'll go to my father, I'll beg him to send you back north. You have to go before anything happens." She tried to scramble up, her movements frantic, but Alaric caught her by the arm and forced her back down. "Stop. Just listen," he commanded. He waited for her breathing to level out, his dark eyes locked onto hers. "Do you actually know where I come from, Sansa? Do you know the history of the house that fostered me?" Sansa blinked, the terror momentarily giving way to a dazed confusion. Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "You were from a small family. A fallen house. My father took you in because he felt sorry for you, didn't he?" Alaric moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, sliding from the chair to the edge of the mattress. He didn't ask for permission, he simply hooked an arm around Sansa's waist and hauled her flush against him. Chapter 34, Promise. "Sorry," he murmured, the word vibrating deep in his chest. "Is that what they're calling it now?" He could feel her trembling, the frantic, fluttering beat of her heart mimicking a bird hitting the bars of a cage. Her fingers knotted into his sleeves, clutching him as if he were the only thing keeping her from drifting away. Alaric leaned back just enough to catch her gaze, his face a mask of hard, unyielding intensity. "I am going to show you something, Sansa," he whispered. His thumb traced a slow, possessive line from her chin to the hinge of her jaw. "But I need your word, here in the dark, that you won't be afraid. Do you promise me?" Sansa looked up at him, her pale eyes searching his. "I promise," she breathed, her voice nothing more than a silver thread in the quiet of the room. Alaric didn't offer a verbal reply. Instead, his gaze dropped to the floor. With a silent inward tug of his will, he called to the dark. The shadows at his feet didn't just move, it boiled like water. Sansa's eyes went wide open, her air cutting off mid-inhale as the flat ink of the floor surged upward. The darkness didn't just move, it swallowed the candlelight, taking on a terrifying, heavy density. Sansa recoiled, a strangled sound catching in her throat, but Alaric's grip was iron. He held her fast, pinning her to his chest. "Easy, little dove," he rumbled against her ear. "The wolf." His eyes, two pools of molten amber, burned with a sharp, piercing intelligence. He brought with him the sudden, sharp scent of sub-zero forests and old iron. Despite his size, the beast moved with an eerie, predatory silence, his massive paws sinking into the rug without a sound. With a flick of Alaric's mind, the monster shifted. There was no snarl, no threat, only a fluid, haunting grace as the apex predator sank onto its haunches. It sat before Sansa like a common hound, tilting its massive head. Shadow's black nose twitched, catching the scent of winter roses and the frantic heat of her skin. It was a terrifying display of restraint from a creature built to crush steel. Sansa remained paralyzed, her nails digging into Alaric's arms, unable to look away from the wolf's glowing eyes. They didn't look like the eyes of an animal, they looked like they were waiting for an order. "He's yours to command now, Sansa. Just as much as he is mine." Alaric's voice was a rough scrape against her ear. "Think of him as the guardian I promised. In a city full of snakes, he's the only thing that can't be bought, poisoned, or swayed." Sansa couldn't look away from the thing. Her breath came in jagged, shallow pulls, her lungs feeling too small for the air in the room. The wolf, if it could even be called that, was a nightmare given physical weight, a mass of ink and burning amber. She was shaking so hard her teeth clicked together, a rhythmic, frantic sound in the quiet chamber. "Alaric." Her voice cracked. "The hound from the road, how is he this? How is he so big?" She looked down at the floor, locking at Alaric's shadow. "The floor, I saw it. He didn't walk in. He came out of you. How did you hide something that large inside yourself?" The questions started spilling out of her, faster and sharper, her voice climbing toward a hysterical peak. "Was he always this size? Have you always been this? Does my father know?" Alaric didn't let her finish. He caught her by the shoulders, turning her in his arms to force her gaze away from the beast and onto him. He didn't use words to quiet her, instead he pressed a calloused finger firmly against her lips. The contact was blunt and grounding, snapping the thread of her panic. "One thing at a time, Sansa," he said, his voice low enough that she had to strain to hear it. He waited, holding her gaze until her eyes stopped darting toward the corners of the room. He adjusted his grip, pulling her into the heat of his chest until her shivering began to dull. "Should I start from the beginning?" With a brief glance toward the monster, Alaric gave a silent nod. The warhorse-sized creature began to buckle and fold, its joints popping with a wet, heavy sound as it shrank. Within seconds, it was just the black hound she remembered from the Kingsroad. Alaric guided her back onto the furs, settling beside her and propping himself up on one elbow. He looked at her for a long moment, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "You know my history. A ward with a dead name," he began. "I didn't know the truth of it myself until my 18th birthday, the morning the king arrived at Winterfell, when we were together under the sentinel tree." Chapter 35, Sansa Approval. He went quiet, his eyes darkening. "Something woke up in me that night. A memory in the blood. My ancestors had a power that let them bind themselves to ancient bloodlines. When we were together, Sansa, I tapped into the legacy of the first men in your veins. That's how I called him Shadow." Sansa stayed perfectly still, her fingers curling into the leather of his tunic as she looked toward the dark shape by the door. "In a way, he's as much yours as mine," Alaric whispered, leaning closer until his breath was warm against her skin. "He was born from that night. He smells your blood in me, and that's why he's so still. To the world, he's a nightmare. To you, he's a protector who will kill anyone who looks at you the wrong way." Sansa lay back against the furs, her chest tight. It was hard to wrap her head around, the idea that this beast was a living manifestation of them both. Alaric didn't pull away, he kept his hand steady against her cheek, his expression softening. "There's more," he said, his voice dropping. "If I'm going to keep you safe from this city, I need to be stronger. My power grows by binding other bloodlines to mine. To ensure the Lannisters can never touch you, I may have to claim other houses." He watched her, his thumb lingering on her jaw. "But I won't do it without your word. If you can't stand the thought of me being with someone else, tell me now. I'll walk away from that power, even if it leaves us open to Cersei. I'd rather be a weak man with you than a king who's lost your heart." The room went quiet, save for the wood popping in the fireplace. Sansa's mind was a blur of images, her brother falling, the queen's sharp smile, the shadows surging like a weapon. The stories she'd grown up on, the songs of knights and fair princes, were dangerous lies. The reality was Alaric, a man who kept a nightmare at his side and carried enough secrets to get them both executed. "You'd really do that?" she whispered. "You'd risk your life just so I wouldn't have to share you?" Alaric gave a firm, slow nod. "I stood by you at Winterfell and I'm standing by you here. If power costs me you, Sansa, I don't want it." Tears pooled in her eyes, but she wiped them away, her jaw setting with a sudden northern hardness. "I've spent every night since the Trident thinking of how to end it," she admitted, her voice brittle. "I thought about the poison in the maester's cabinet. I'd rather die than let Joffrey touch me, Alaric. I'd rather sleep forever than marry him." Her breath hitched and the pressure of it all finally broke. She balled her hand into a fist and hit him in the chest, a sharp strike fueled by pure frustration. "How can you do this?" she cried softly, hitting him again. "How can you tell me these things, these horrible secrets, and then tell me you love me enough to die for my pride?" She slumped against him, her forehead resting against his collarbone as she clutched his tunic. "You're a selfish, terrifying man," she sobbed. "How am I supposed to want to die now? How can I leave you alone with these vipers? If you need this power to keep us alive, then do it. Just..." She looked up, her face flushed. "Just always come back to me. Let me be the one you return to." Alaric pulled her close, his arms wrapping tightly around her. He rested his chin on the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Don't worry," he murmured. "No matter how many bonds I forge, no one can take your place. You're the foundation, Sansa. The first spark. Everyone else is just a tool. You are the heart of this." They stayed like that for a long time, their breathing eventually falling into the same rhythm. The terror was still there, but it had changed. It was a shared burden now, a pact that made the Red Keep feel less like a tomb and more like a battlefield. Finally, she pulled back to look at him. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice a hushed whisper. "If the prince is a bastard, if they all are, then Joffrey has no right to the throne. We can just go to my father, can't we? He's the hand. He's the most powerful man here besides the king. He could fix this. We could all just go home." Alaric's expression went cold. He reached out, tucking a stray lock of red hair behind her ear. "Your father is a man of honor, Sansa," Alaric said, his voice flat. "And in this city, honor is a noose. If we tell him, he'll go straight to Robert. He'll do the noble thing. Do you know what Cersei Lannister does when she's backed into a corner? She burns the corner down." Chapter 36, Nyx. He glanced toward the wolf Shadow, who sat like a statue by the door. "If the truth comes out before I'm ready, your father will be dead before sunset. You and Arya will be hostages or worse. Robert is a broken king, Sansa. He's surrounded by Lannister gold and Lannister guards. Striking at the Queen's children is starting a war in a palace where we're outnumbered 100-1. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "We say nothing to Lord Eddard. Not yet. He doesn't know how to play this game, and I won't have his blood, or yours, on my hands because of his honor. I'll build my own strength and wait for the lions to make a mistake. Only then do we strike. Of course he can't have them caught yet. He still has to harvest a lot of MP from them first." Sansa listened to his grim assessment of her father's honor, her heart sinking as she realized the cold logic in Alaric's words. She had seen her father's rigid nature her entire life. He was a man who moved like a mountain, slow and unyielding, while the people in this city moved like water, fluid, deceptive, and capable of drowning the unwary. "I trust you," she whispered. She leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting once more to the door where the Black Hound sat. The fear was still there, a prickle at the back of her neck, but curiosity began to bloom in its place. She thought of what he had said about the union of his power and her blood. "Is he really?" She started, her voice faltering as she looked at the beast. "Is he truly like a child to us? Our son?" Alaric gave a low, dark chuckle, the sound vibrating through his chest. "Not a child in the way you dream of, little dove. He wasn't born in a cradle, his essence recognizes you. To him I am the master, but you are the source. In his primal mind we are the only two beings that matter. Father and mother, it is a simple way to put it, but yes, his loyalty to you is woven into his very spirit." Sansa swallowed hard, her blue eyes shimmering. She looked at the hound and for the first time didn't see a monster. She saw a protector born of the love. "Shadow," she called out, her voice soft but surprisingly steady. "Come here." The wolf didn't move at first, his amber eyes flicking to Alaric for the briefest of seconds. Alaric gave a sharp, imperceptible nod. Instantly the beast rose. He didn't trot like a dog, he moved with the silent, ghostly gait of a predator. As he reached the edge of the bed, his massive head was level with Sansa's chest. He let out a low, huffing breath, the heat of it warming her hands. Sansa reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the obsidian fur. It wasn't coarse like a common wolf's, it felt like cool silk and tempered steel. As she began to pet the space between his ears, Shadow let out a deep, vibrating rumble, a sound that would have terrified a grown knight, but to Sansa it felt like the purr of a mountain. He leaned his heavy head into her palm, closing his eyes in a display of total, vulnerable submission. "He's so warm," she breathed, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her pale mask. She looked at Alaric, her eyes bright. "He really does know me." Sansa ran her fingers through the thick black fur. Her fear had faded, replaced by a strange, quiet wonder. The wolf leaned into her touch, resting his heavy head on the edge of the mattress with a soft huff of air. As the silence stretched, Sansa's brow furrowed. She looked from the massive beast back to Alaric. "Shadow?" she asked, her voice regaining some of its old, playful edge. "That's really what you've been calling him?" Alaric blinked, caught off guard. "It fits. He lives in my shadow. It's practical." Sansa let out a short laugh that was almost a scoff. She pulled her hand away from the wolf's ears and punched Alaric in the shoulder. "You Alaric, you have the imagination of a rock," she chided, hitting him again, lighter this time. "Shadow? You named a creature born of our blood after a patch of darkness? You're a dummy. Do you even know how to name anything?" Alaric rubbed his arm, a lopsided grin breaking through his mask. "I've been a little busy staying alive, Sansa. I didn't think he needed a poet's touch." "Everything needs a bit of thought," she countered. The wolf looked up at her, his amber eyes expectant. "He's the product of the North and your power. He deserves a real name. Not something a stable boy would call a barn cat." Alaric chuckled, leaning back on his elbow. Seeing her fuss over a name made the room feel warm again, pushing the danger of the Red Keep into the corners. "Fine," he murmured. "If my name isn't good enough for a lady of the North, then you do it. He's as much yours as mine. Name him yourself." Sansa went still, her gaze locking onto the wolf's eyes. She ran her hand down his snout, feeling the heat of his breath. She thought of the winter roses at Winterfell and the cold stars they'd seen on the road. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against the wolf's cool, dark brow. She wanted a name that sounded like the old songs, but with the bite of a northern winter. "Nyx," she whispered. "It's an old word for the night. It's short and sharp and it belongs to the dark just like he does. Not shadow, that's just where light isn't. Nyx is the night itself." The beast let out a low chuff, leaning into her hand as if he liked the change. Alaric laughed softly, shaking his head. "Nyx." He reached out, covering her hand with his own on the wolf's fur. "Very well. He is Nyx. Though I suspect he'll still only listen to me when he feels like it." Sansa beamed. "He'll listen to me because I'm the one who gave him an identity. You just treated him like a tool." She leaned her head against Alaric's shoulder, her hand still buried in the black fur. Chapter 37, Night Before Hand's Tourney. Alaric watched the connection between Sansa and the wolf with a sense of satisfaction. She wasn't just accepting this power, she was embracing it. But the internal clock in his head warned him that they were in the Red Keep, not the open north. He gently took her hand, pulling it away from the black fur. "I should go before your father checks on you. He's the hand now, but he still has a father's eyes. If he finds me here this late, even my service to him won't stop the questions." Sansa's smile dipped. She looked at the door and nodded, her fingers tightening briefly around his. "You're right. He said he'd stop by after the small council meeting to talk about the tourney." Alaric stood, his movements silent and fluid. With a mental tug, he signaled the wolf. Nyx stood, gave Sansa one last look with his amber eyes and padded toward Alaric. As the beast crossed his path, it lost its form, melting like ink into the shadows at Alaric's feet. Back in his Spartan quarters, Alaric sat on the edge of his cot in the dark. He didn't light a candle, he didn't need one to see the blue interface shimmering in his mind. Current balance, 1,545 MP. The hand's tourney was the only thing anyone in the barracks talked about. Robert was throwing a massive celebration for a man who didn't want it, using money the crown didn't have. Alaric drummed his fingers against his knee. A tournament in this city wasn't just about sport, it was a stage for accidents and blood-bought reputations. "The Queen will make sure I'm on that list," he muttered to the empty room. He had Sansa's permission now, which meant he needed to find his next bond. Marjorie Tyrell was the logical choice. Myrcella, the bastard princess, was too much of a grenade. If he touched the girl, Cersei would stop playing games and simply burn the city down. But the Rose of Highgarden was different. The Tyrells had the food, the gold, and the men. "She's ambitious," Alaric whispered, feeling Nyx stir in the shadows at his feet. "And I might be the only thing in this city big enough to satisfy that ambition." Far to the south, in the gardens of Highgarden, Margaery Tyrell sat among her roses. She had been taught by the Queen of Thorns that information was the most valuable currency in the world. "Are you certain, Loras?" she asked, her voice calm and curious. The Queen was dismissed in front of everyone? Loras Tyrell leaned against a marble pillar, a disbelieving smirk on his face. Not just dismissed. She was lectured on justice by a northern ward, a boy from a dead house named Alaric Thorne. The scouts say he looked Jaime Lannister in the eye without blinking while the king roared at Cersei to shut her mouth. Margaery tilted her head, a thoughtful smile touching her lips. "A boy with no name who humbles the lions? I think I should like to meet this Northman at the tourney." In the days that followed, Alaric maintained his double life. By day he was Sansa's shadow, by night he managed his growing network. System, he thought. Status update. The interface hummed, showing the Red Keep mapped out in pulsing red dots. Blood Scout 01, Tower of the Hand. Monitoring Eddard Stark and Littlefinger. Blood Scout 02, Kitchens. Watching for Lannister poisons. Blood Scout 03, Tourney Grounds. Tracking the Queen's Sellswords. Current balance, 945 MP. He'd spent 600 points on 2 more scouts. It was a steep price but necessary. The tourney began in the morning and Alaric knew the game was about to get much more violent. He moved through the Tower of the Hand with a predatory grace. His enhanced senses picked up every shift in the air, every distant footfall. Using the vigilance boost from the wolf in his shadow, he slipped past the guard rotations and reached Sansa's door. He gave the rhythmic knock they'd agreed upon. The latch was unlocked. He stepped inside, the door clicking shut with a finality that sealed them away from the vipers outside. Alaric crossed the room silently. Sansa sat at her vanity, her copper hair cascading over her shoulders as she worked a brush through the tangles with rhythmic strokes. In the soft glow of the lanterns, the reflection in the glass revealed the lingering tension in her eyes. He stepped up behind her, his hands coming up to cup her face. He caught her gaze in the mirror and gave her cheek a sharp, playful pinch. "Ow. Alaric," she gasped, a flush creeping up from her neck. She leaned her back against his chest, her fingers resting against his leather-clad arms. "The tourney starts tomorrow," she said quietly. "The mountain is there. Jaime Lannister, too. Everyone says they're the most dangerous men in the world." She turned around in his arms, her hands reaching for the buckles of his armor. "You're always so tense," she muttered. "You're carrying everything on your own, my father's safety, the secret about Bran, the Queen's threats." She unhooked his sword belt and let it drop to the floor. Her fingers moved to the laces of his vest, her breathing hitching. "I don't want you going out there tomorrow with your head full of stress," she said, looking up at him. "If you're going to fight those monsters, I want you focused. I don't want you thinking about anything but coming back to me." She stepped back toward the bed, slowly pulling the silk ties of her dress. The gown slid off her shoulders, pooling at her feet. In the dim light, she looked at him with a directness she'd never shown before. "Come here," she said. Alaric Thorne status update. Current MP, 945. Key attributes, endurance enhanced, strength enhanced. Passives, winter skin, plus 20% multiplier. Summons, Nyx, Ancient Direwolf, 3x Blood Scouts. New ability, Umberland Dwelling, Shadow Meld. Chapter 38 is Sunu. So read it in the web novel. Welcome back, guys. Now let's continue. Chapter 39, Immunity. Sansa flinched, a painful crimson flush creeping up her neck. She scrambled to sit up, though her legs felt like water, keeping her gaze fixed on her lap. I am sorry, Alaric," she whispered, her voice a ragged thread. "For what?" "The noise," she breathed, her fingers twisting nervously in the damp furs. "I was meant to be quiet. Someone could have been at the door. I tried. I truly tried to hold it back." He reached out, his hand moving with a slow deliberation. Instead of a harsh grip, he cupped her breast, his palm heavy and warm. He squeezed gently, his thumb brushing the sensitive peak. He leaned forward, pressing a surprisingly tender kiss to her forehead to settle her nerves. "Forget it, Sansa," he murmured. "You worry too much." It wasn't that loud. I doubt anyone in the hall heard so much as a whisper. He pulled back, offering a small, mocking smirk that carried the weight of absolute confidence. "You were perfect. Don't let the fear of some imaginary guard ruin the memory of what you gave me." Sansa let out a long, shuddering breath, her tension finally bleeding away. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "If you are sure. I just lost myself. I've never been so loud." "I'm sure," he said firmly. Internally, Alaric felt a surge of grim amusement. If not for the barrier, the little dove would be the talk of the Seven Kingdoms by breakfast. The king's guard, the servants, even Varys's spies, they would have heard every wet impact of his cock hitting her ass and every ragged scream of her surrender as he pounded her pussy raw. As she drifted into a heavy, dreamless sleep against his chest, Alaric realized he had pushed her to her absolute limit. He wasn't about to let his princess wake up in the grime of their marathon. System, he thought, his gaze narrowing. Clean the room. Clean me and her also. The blue interface flared in his mind, deducting the points as a faint, golden shimmer rippled through the chamber. In an instant the musky scent of passion vanished, replaced by the biting clarity of morning frost and lavender. The stained furs snapped back into a perfect, smooth state, the rumpled silks were replaced by fresh linens. The magic washed over Sansa as well, evaporating the sweat and the thick coating of his cum from her thighs and stomach, leaving her skin soft and dry. Alaric felt the same cold pulse strip away the dried fluids and scent of her pussy from his skin, leaving him restored. Utility Protocol, Room Restoration, Cost 1 MP. Complete molecular restoration of fabrics and neutralization of scents. Utility Protocol, Personal Hygiene, Target, Sansa Stark, Cost 1 MP. Removal of biological fluids, semen, sweat, vaginal lubrication, and restoration of skin comfort. Utility Protocol, Personal Hygiene, Host, Alaric Thorne, Cost 1 MP. Removal of sweat and fluids. He stood from the bed, his movements silent and powerful. He took a final look at Sansa. Her face was peaceful, the restoration having smoothed away the salt of her tears and the flush of her exhaustion. The room was now a masterpiece of deception. He pulled on his boots and adjusted his tunic. Alaric slipped out the door, his enhanced senses already mapping the empty corridors of the keep. Alaric sat heavily in the deep oak chair of his quarter. The silence of the chambers was the antithesis of the frenetic pace within the tower at the hand, but gradually steadied his breathing. His discomfort was dwarfed by the blue glow of the interface that lingered in front of his eyes. He checked his balance, which was currently 4,932. The little dove had become a plump investment. Notifications passed by one after another. Sovereign bond updated. Target, Sansa Stark. Bond status, level 2, deeply bound. Context, absolute physical and spiritual submission achieved. Reward, plus 4,000 monarch points. Additional rewards. Ability, Venom Purge / Absolute Toxicity Immunity. Effect, your blood will have been chemically altered to neutralize instantly any foreign toxins, biological agents, or sedatives. It matters little if they are smuggled in with wine or with a poison dagger. Unique passive, Monarch's Shared Vitality. Context, given the strength of bonding with Sansa Stark, your genetic status is now tied to hers. Shared effect, your poison immunity now permanently shares with Sansa. Any attempts made to poison her will fail. She, as you, is now untouchable. A slow smile spread across Alaric's face. In the city where the most commonly used weapon was the single drop of Lysian tears in the chalice, Alaric had just rendered the Lannisters' preferred ploy useless. Morning light was creeping in when he finally got up. After some hours of resting, he got up. He almost forgot today is Hans tourney, and how can Sansa be absent in her own father's celebration? He moved through the castle, then through the Red Keep, to stand before Sansa's door, his hand striking a sharp, rhythmic knock upon the wood. No sound stirred in response to it. He knew she was likely asleep, so he worked the iron latch quietly, his hand a practiced motion as he produced a soft, faint click from the door. The air still had a light scent of mountain breeze and lavender from the system's renovation. Sansa sprawled across the silks. Copper hair surrounded her head like a halo among the cushions. She hadn't moved since he left. Alaric moved softly across the floor and settled himself beside her on the edge of the mattress. It buckled underneath him. He leaned closer and traced her jaw-line with his thumb as he tried to wake her up. Chapter 40, Tyrell. "Wake up, little dove," he murmured, his voice a low vibration. Sansa's eyes fluttered, initially dazed before recognition hit. She bolted upright, letting out a sharp "oh" as the rhythmic soreness in her body flared in protest. "Alaric? What time is it?" she hissed, pulling the furs to her chest, her face flushing a deep, feverish pink. "The sun is on the battlements," Alaric said, his eyes steady. "The tourney begins soon and the city is already gathering. Dress quickly before Septa Mordane comes to check on the you. Hearing his words, memories of the night flooded her mind. She glanced down at herself, naked beneath the blankets, and her face deep into a violent shade of crimson. Recalling her own boldness during their hours together, she buried her face in the furs to hide her shame. However, as she peeked out and surveyed the room, she realized she felt refreshed. There was no lingering scent of their passion, and the chamber was meticulously clean. She knew only one person could have managed this, him. She leaned over and pressed a quick, darting kiss to his cheek before springing up, clutching the blanket around her like a shield. Her limbs felt heavy and sore from the night's exertions, but it wasn't debilitating. She had grown somewhat accustomed to the sensation since losing her maidenhead. At the vanity, Sansa worked with practiced speed. She smoothed the heavy velvet of her travel garments, the thick, layered skirts masking any lingering stiffness in her stride. Catching Alaric's satisfied gaze in the mirror, she immediately looked away, her cheeks still burning. "I am ready," she whispered, her voice finally steady. They had barely cleared the threshold of her room before the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of a cane echoed down the hall. Septa Mordane rounded the corner, her usual mask of rigid discipline cracking into surprise at the sight of them. "Sansa, child," the scepter exclaimed, clutching her prayer beads. "I was just coming to wake you. You seem remarkably prepared." Sansa offered a stiff, regal nod, her posture impeccable despite the dull ache in her limbs. "I woke early, Septa. The excitement of the tourney, I suppose." Mordane narrowed her eyes, inspecting the girl's hair and the high, tight collar of her dress. "Indeed. And your ward Thorne already at his post." She shot Alaric a suspicious glance, but his face was a masterpiece of professional indifference. "A guard's duty begins before the dawn, Septa," Alaric replied, his voice a dry rasp. "Well," the Septa huffed, smoothing her robes. "The king's party is already gathering. It wouldn't do for a lady of Winterfell to be late. You look a bit flushed, Sansa. Are you quite well?" "Perfectly, Septa," Sansa said, leaning subtly into Alaric's presence as they turned toward the great hall. "I am simply ready for the day." As they finally arrived in tourney ground, the air was a thick soup of roasting grease and sun-baked horse musk, laced with the sharp metallic tang of oiled plate armor. When they reached the high-raised stands, the king's pavilion cast a long velvet shadow over them. Alaric guided Sansa toward the front, his palms settling against the small of her back. The touch lingered, a warm, silent claim that hummed through her travel silks, before he moved to his post. At the center of the spectacle, King Robert sat slumped and bloated, his eyes glazed with boredom. Beside him, Cersei. Sansa slipped into her place, feeling Arya's restless energy before she even looked at her. Her sister was already hunched over a scrap of leather, fingers twitching as if she were plotting an escape. Alaric took the seat to Sansa's right, his broad frame creating a wall between her and the common walkway. The roar of the crowd was reaching a fever pitch when a light melodic voice drifted from behind. It carried the soft lilting cadence of the Reach, a sound of gardens and summer silks. "Pardon me, sire, is this seat taken?" Alaric turned, and for a rare moment, his expression shifted to genuine surprise. Standing there in green silks that smelled of jasmine and high summer was Margaery Tyrell. He stared at her, his mind racing. According to every scrap of knowledge he possessed, she shouldn't be here. The Tyrells weren't supposed to enter the game until much later. "The seat is free, my lady," Alaric said, his voice a steady rasp as he shifted his weight to make room. Margaery sat, her silk skirts settling with a soft rustle. She didn't look at him immediately, keeping her eyes on the field while smoothing her dress with a gloved hand. "It's much more crowded than I expected," she said, her tone conversational and light. My brother Loras is riding in the third tilt, and I find the Tyrell stands a bit suffocating today. Too much family tension. The Stark banners looked peaceful. She turned then, offering Alaric a practiced, polite smile, the kind reserved for high-ranking guards or minor lords. I hope I'm not intruding on Lady Sansa's peace. It's a lovely day for a tourney, isn't it? Her eyes lingered on Alaric a beat longer than protocol dictated, a sharp intelligence dancing behind the courtesy. Then she pivoted toward Sansa with effortless, sun-drenched warmth. Oh, where are my manners? Marjorie's voice dropped into a melodic lilt. She leaned slightly past Alaric. I've quite forgotten to introduce myself. I am Marjorie of House Tyrell. My brother Loras has spoken of nothing but the honor of hosting the Starks, though I fear he was too modest about the beauty of the northern ladies. Sansa, her spine rigid as a tree, forced a regal nod. You are very kind, my lady, Sansa replied, her voice steady but guarded. I am Sansa Stark. This is my sister Arya and our septa Mordain. A pleasure, Marjorie chirped. Her eyes flicked briefly to Arya, who was aggressively picking at a leather strap, before returning to Sansa. Highgarden has heard much of Winterfell, but the songs do not do justice to your hair. It is like a sunset over the Mander. Alaric watched the exchange, his dark eyes scanning the crowd while his mind ran the numbers. The system shimmered in his peripheral vision. Target analysis, Marjorie Tyrell. Relationship, strangers intrigued. Aura, ambition veiled in courtesy. Status, seeking a stable anchor in the capital's shifting tides. It must be such a change for you, Sansa, Marjorie continued, resting her chin on a gloved hand. The capital is so loud. Do you find it overwhelming? I know I did when I first arrived. Sansa smoothed her velvet skirts, her movements calculated to avoid a wince. The air is heavier here. Heavier and far less honest, Marjorie agreed with a soft laugh, her eyes darting toward the royal pavilion where Cersei sat like a jade idol. In Highgarden, we say roses have thorns, but at least you can see them. In King's Landing, the thorns are hidden in the wine and the whispers. She turned back to Alaric, her smile widening. And your guard? He seems quite vigilant. I don't think I've seen a man sit so still while 1,000 people shout. Is he always so quiet? Alaric is my protector, Sansa said, a protective edge sharpening her tone. He has been my shield since we left Winterfell. He doesn't speak much because he is busy watching for those hidden thorns you mentioned.